You've described this as an intelligence failure, but a failure is something that happens accidentally.
None of the intelligence that was coming up talking about the storming of the Capitol, killing members of Congress, or killing my police officers was ever discussed at the conference calls that I was on, at least.
That doesn't seem to make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense. I'm looking at my men and women having their asses handed to them, and my first thought was, fuck it, I will take whatever discipline there is.
Once things got out of control, for 71 minutes, Pelosi refused to allow you to bring in the National Guard. Why don't we have answers?
It doesn't seem like people really want to get to the bottom of it, and it gets worse from there. I had a conference call with the leaders of all the law enforcement. It was a call I coordinated. Not one person on that call talked about any concerns for the intelligence, the attack on the Capitol that we were seeing that was out there. That's what's scary.
This sounds like a setup to me. I'm sorry, it does.
New Jersey State Police beat DC National Guard to the Capitol.
Wait, cops drove from New Jersey before the National Guard could get from the Armory on Capitol Hill to the Capitol. Why isn't this story everywhere?
I have no idea.
If you wanted to understand what happened on January 6, 2021 at the U.S. Capitol, one of the first people you'd talk to, maybe the first, would be Stephen Sund. Sund was the chief of Capitol Police that day. He knew more about what happened than virtually anyone else in the United States. And yet congressional investigators weren't interested in talking to him. The media, not interested in talking to him. But we were. So earlier this year, we did a long sit-down interview with Stephen Sund about January 6th. That interview was set to air on April 24th of this year, and it never did. We don't own that tape, so we can't show it to you. So instead, we invited Stephen Sund back to explain what he saw and experienced that day. What he has to say is shocking. We recommend you watch. Mr. Sund, thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you for having me back.
So I want to start with the days before January 6th, 2021. It was commonly known there was going to be a demonstration, or believed there was going to be a demonstration in front of the Capitol that day. You were the chief of Capitol Police. You're in charge of security at the Capitol. So it would seem logical that you would have the most intelligence, the most up-to-date, most accurate intelligence about what was likely to happen that day, because you're consulting with all kinds of other agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement agencies, lots of federal agencies. But it doesn't sound like you did have the most information about what was going to happen.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, what we've learned that it was out there at the time versus what we had coming into it, night and day. And when you talk about the intelligence agency, I have my own intelligence agency up at Capitol Police, IICD, Interagency Intelligence Coordination Division.
Yes.
That coordinates with the other intelligence agencies. And now, we're seeing the intelligence I was getting coming into it was indicating this was going to be just like the previous MAGA rallies, the November and December rallies that we had, where we had limited skirmishes. We had some skirmishes afterwards down by BLM Plaza with some of the Antifa groups and some of the BLM groups. But coming into it, absolutely zero with the intelligence that we know now existed, talking about attacking the Capitol, killing my police officers, attacking members of Congress and killing members of Congress. None of that was included in the intelligence coming up to.
That you received.
Correct.
But others received that intelligence.
Well, we now know FBI, DHS was swimming in that intelligence. We also know now that the military seemed to have some very concerning intelligence as well.
It's hard to overstate how strange that is, because you were in charge of the actual facility that was the focus of the protest.
Well, think about it. I'm the chief of police at the United States Capitol, probably one of the most prominent and should be the most secure building in the United States, in the world. You'd like to think of that. But when you look at it, and don't take my word for it, there's now at least four congressional reports talking about the intelligence failure, IG reports, GAO reports talking about various intelligence failures. But coming into it, think about it. FBI, the Washington field office didn't put out a single document, a single official document specific to January 6th. DHS didn't put out a single official document specific to January 6th. That's very unusual. I've been through many other events in Washington, D.C. FBI would host a joint conference call at the least, maybe a executive JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force briefing, and for all these big events, DHS and FBI would get together and put out something that was called a JIB, a Joint Intelligence Bulletin. Zero for January 6th.
So you've described this as an intelligence failure, but a failure is something that happens accidentally. And I don't see how this could be accidental. So walk us through the contact that you had with DHS and FBI in the days before January 6th.
So my contacts with those agencies or the other law enforcement agencies would have always been through my IICD.
Yes.
They were the ones that was the conduit. We're a consumer of intelligence. We had turned to the intelligence community to get the latest intelligence. I know Metropolitan was hosting a conference call every couple of Mondays, and I was on a couple of those conference calls. None of the intelligence that was coming up talking about the storming of the Capitol, killing members of Congress, or killing my police officers was ever discussed in those the conference calls that I was on, at least. And think of this.
And so you never heard that?
Never heard it. And
But how could you not have? I don't work in a federal bureaucracy, but that doesn't seem to make sense at all.
it doesn't make sense. Think about this. On January 5th, the day before the attack, at 1 p.m., I think it's 1 or noon, I had a conference call with the leaders of all the law enforcement, Conti from Metropolitan Police Department, Steve D'Antuono, the director of the Washington Field Office for the FBI. Nobody from DHS was on. I hadn't thought about that, but all the law enforcement that was down there. I had the Military District of Washington, General Omar Jones, on the phone with me. I had the head of the National Guard, William Walker, General William Walker, on the call. It was a call I coordinated. Not one person on that call talked about any concerns for the intelligence, the attack on the Capitol, the threats to officers that we were seeing that was out there. That's what's scary.
But to be clear, do we now know for a fact that the people on that call knew about those threats and didn't mention them to you?
So this is what we know for a fact, and I'll tell you, I'm not the only chief that was in the dark. You look at Robert Conti, head of the largest police department in Washington, D.C. He also said the same thing. He wasn't getting the same notifications like the Norfolk memo that came out the day before. He didn't get it. So Steve D'Antuono, who's the Washington Field Office FBI director, you look at the GAO report that came out February of this year. It talks about multiple emails. Is the GAO report, or it's a Senate report that just came out in July, just last month. Talks about multiple emails going to Steve D'Antuono on Sunday, Monday, and some probably Tuesday, just the days before, talking about the violence that they're predicting coming up to the Capitol. And I have a video call with him on that Tuesday, and nothing said about it. I mean,
he didn't mention it.
Not a word, not a word.
So, not to repeat myself, but that just does not make sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't, especially when you think about this, the military, the United States military. And this gets really convoluted once you get into the response on January 6th and how I was delayed getting resources. You have the United States military, Secretary of Defense or Acting Secretary of Defense Miller and General Milley had both discussed locking down the city of Washington, D.C. because they were so worried about violence at the Capitol on January 6th. On Sunday and Monday, they had been discussing locking down the city, revoking permits on Capitol Hill because of the concern for violence. You know who issues the permits on Capitol Hills for demonstrations? I do. You know who wasn't told? Me. Instead, on January 4th, what does Miller do? He puts out a memo restricting the National Guard from carrying the various weapons, any civil disobedience equipment that would be utilized for the very demonstrations or violence that he sees coming. It just doesn't make any sense.
Wait. So the military says we're so concerned about potential imminent violence that we are considering shutting down the city. But at the very same time, they decide that the National Guard can't adopt an aggressive posture to protect the city.
They're deploying because they're going to be deploying National Guard to assist Washington, D.C. with crowd control at metros and some of the traffic control areas. But they put this out on January 4th, specific to January 5th and 6th. And this direction affected the National Guard in Virginia and Maryland. When I was calling, begging for assistance on January 6th, they weren't allowed to respond at first. You look at Governor Hogan. He did a press conference saying he was begging to respond, and he was being denied by the Pentagon, all because of the memo.
So why?
You know, you begin to wonder why, and especially when you look at things like something that I recently came across. When you talk about the military, General Milley, you know, we're now finding out, and it's not from me. This is from Carol Lenig, you know, investigative reporter with the Washington Post, has found that he was using data miner on his own, coming across intelligence.
Tell us what data miner is.
So data miner is an intelligence platform. It's not something your average citizen would have on their computer. I guess it goes in and does crawling across webs. I'm not really sure how it works.
Yes.
But it's not it's an intelligence platform. He's picking up intelligence talking about killing members of Congress and attacking the United States Capitol. And he's not telling me. He's telling select members of Congress. I mean, Carol Lenig writes about it in her book. That's concerning as hell, because as the chief of police, you know, there's a duty to warn there, and I should be told so I can take the necessary action. I don't know who else he was telling, but he sure wasn't telling me.
again, what could possibly be the explanation for that?
I'm not really sure. People
But
are.
you've done this for over 30 years. You're very familiar. You've been in law enforcement in D.C. specifically for over 30 years. So you know how the city runs. You know how the federal agencies respond to protests. This is not the first violent protest.
Not at all.
There have been many.
I've done many national special security events, and this was handled differently. No, the intelligence, no jib, no coordination, no discussion in advance. It's almost like they wanted it to be watered down, the intelligence to be watered down for some reason. I talked about a little bit in the book that maybe they were concerned for the Trump invoking the Insurrection Act, and they're worried about that. But I've had people, there's those other, thoughts out there. But luckily we still have people investigating this because I still think there's puzzle pieces missing. Someone's going to find out what's really behind all this because it wasn't right the way the intelligence was handled and the way out we're set up on the Hill.
Big picture, just to restate, you've seen many things like this, and as you just said, this was very different. This was handled very differently. By whom?
By the intelligence. I'd say one, by the intelligence agency, two, by the military. So the reason why I say the military, think of this. By federal law, Congress passed a law that requires me to go to the Sergeant Arms Capitol Police Board in advance of an event and to request federal resources such as the National Guard. So Congress passed a law. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look it up. Just make sure you look it up before December 22 when they changed it. So what was in effect on the 6th, that requires me to go and get approval for bringing in National Guard or federal assistance in advance. I have to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval from congressional leadership in advance, like I did on January 3rd. I'm denied twice because of optics and because the intelligence didn't support it. So think about that.
Let me ask you the question, who made that decision? Who denied you?
I was denied by Paul Irving, House Sergeant Arms, and also Mike Stenger, Senate Sergeant Arms.
And who do
on January 3rd.
Who do they work for?
It would have been working for Pelosi on the House side. That Pelosi was his number one boss, and then McConnell on the Senate side.
Ah.
So
effectively, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi shut down your request.
My request was shut down, one, because of optics, which is interesting. You're going to hear that term come up a couple more times. Optics, or the look of the National Guard on the Hill. But yeah, in the Capitol Police Board, I mean, it's unbelievable that I'm the only chief of police in the United States that has a law preventing me, not just regulations, rules that say I got to go and get approval to bring in the National Guard, a law. So that's crazy that Congress is going to pass a law that controls what I can do to protect the Capitol, and even in emergency. So think of this. Even while we're under attack, I have to go to those same two people to request the National Guard to be brought in. I have 340 National Guard that have been activated. At least 150 to 180 of those are in the city, many of them within eyesight of the Capitol, okay? We get to come under attack at 12:53. 12:55, I called the Washington, D.C. Police Department. I talked to their Assistant Chief, Jeff Carroll. Thank God I had talked to him at 10:59 in the morning and asked him if he could possibly put some additional resources on Constitution Avenue. And he had some CDU platoons up there. Called him, said, hey, please send those in right away, because we knew as soon as they came up to their west front, they started attacking, it was going to be bad. 12:58, I make my first call to the Sergeant Arms, asking, saying, hey, it's bad, we need assistance, I need a declaration of emergency, I need to bring in the military immediately and federal resources. I'm told by Paul Irving, quote, I'm going to run it up the chain, I'll get back to you.
The chain is Pelosi.
The chain his chain would be up to Nancy Pelosi. He didn't have to do that, but he wouldn't give me authorization. The law says in emergency he can grant me authorization, but he didn't. He said he'd run up the chain. My next call was over to Mike Stenger. He's now the chairman of the Capitol Police Board. Told him the same thing. We're getting our asses handed to us on the west front. I need federal resources. He said, what did Paul tell you? I said, he's run up the chain. He goes, let's wait to hear what we hear from Paul. Sorry. So for the next 71 minutes, I make 32 calls. I'm in the command center. I'm calling my partner agencies. And by law, one of the first people to offer assistance was the United States Secret Service. And by law, I shouldn't have requested their assistance. I shouldn't be until I had approval. But I'm looking at my men and women having their asses handed to them. And my first thought was, fuck it, I will take whatever discipline there is. Send me whatever you got. No, that's the one text Secret Service turned over. You know how they lost all their texts?
Yes.
It's the text between their Chief Sullivan and myself. Thank God for him.
But I don't. You make this call immediately to the House Sergeant Arms, who reports Mr. Irving, who reports to Nancy Pelosi. He says, "I'll call Pelosi."
He says, "I'm gonna run it up the chain."
Run it up the chain, but that is the chain.
No, I hear you. I got you. I want to tell you exactly what he said.
What happens then? Does he get back to you?
So for the next 71 minutes, I make the 32 calls to a number of agencies. 11 of those calls are follow-up calls. And look in the Senate combined report from 2001. They have a great infographic of the call after call after call after call. 11 times I call in the next 71 minutes going, where are we on the approval? Where are we on the approval? Just any minute now. Any minute. I'm going to get any minute. Finally at 2:09, 71 minutes later, 2:09, I'm finally given approval. Think about that. 71 minutes later, I immediately call Mike Stinger, say we've got approval. I was so pissed off, I made sure that the watch commander, I'm in the command center, I yelled to John Wisham, the lieutenant, that's my watch commander, I said, John, mark the time as 2:10. I finally got approval for the National Guard. I was that mad.
So what is I just want to pause on this for a minute. That's like, it's almost unbelievable. So this is an event that Pelosi herself has likened to Pearl Harbor and 9/11, the worst thing that's ever happened on American soil. And she's in charge of allowing the National Guard to come in and respond, but she doesn't for 71 minutes. What is that?
I can't fathom why. I mean, they had to have known what was going on. I was telling them how bad it was.
Well, it was on TV.
It was on TV. It was right outside of Mike Stinger's office. And they had a meeting in his office saying, hey, where's the National Guard? And they're like, oh, we're trying to make... The fighting is going on right outside his office. And I'm still getting delayed.
This is an unbelievable story.
Oh, it is. Now get a kick out of this.
Has anyone ever explained this?
It's verbatim in my book. I have details. The whole chapter on January 6th is almost 100 pages long.
But I don't understand. So we're only 10 minutes into this, and you've told me two things. One, the other federal agencies withheld critical information from you in charge of security at the Capitol before January 6th. And once it started and things got out of control, for 71 minutes, Pelosi refused to allow you to bring in the National Guard. So those are two of the biggest questions from January 6th. And my question is, why don't we have answers to why that happened?
It doesn't seem like people really want to get to the bottom of it. It really doesn't. And it just gets worse. It gets worse from there.
I'm sorry to step on your story. It's shocking.
It is. It is shocking to think that we should be a coordinated security apparatus. There's regulations. There's procedures for defense support for civil authorities. I've taught it for the military. They don't realize they brought me in to ask me to actually teach this for foreign governments coming to visit. There's a process for when law enforcement needs help and we dial 911. It's to the military. And that failed. That failed miserably because of the law Congress passed and the denial I was receiving.
Well, it sounds like it was prevented. So Paul Irving, the guy who had, you're saying, the statutory authority to give that okay, has he ever explained why he didn't?
Oh, they had him and he testified at the Senate hearing in 2001.
2021?
I'm sorry, 2021. My apologies. Thank you for catching. A couple of times he disagreed with my recollection. I can tell you my phone records. I turned them over immediately. I fought to testify. They didn't want me to testify in the Senate hearing. I fought to testify.
Why wouldn't they? Oh, there's so much here. Why? Who didn't want you to testify?
So when
You're the chief of Capitol Police on January 6th. I mean,
you and me are on lockstep with this, and my story hasn't changed in 2.5 years. So when they first put out the notice, and they were talking about having the hearing, it was only for current employees that were still in place. No one that was no longer in place in their position in security. So think about that. Initially, when they put out the request to have they were talking about having the hearing, it would have excluded Paul Irving, would have excluded Mike Stinger, and it would have excluded me. Only 3 people. The 3 people at the top of the security apparatus.
So the Democrats, I think.
Well, it was joint. It was a combined joint.
Sorry.
I hear you.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Of course. The Uniparty intentionally excluded the 3 people who would know the answers to the key questions.
Yeah, the original plan was to exclude them. I immediately called somebody I knew on the Rules Committee and said, please let me testify. I will be there in person. And I still remember, she said, you'll show up in person? I said, I promise you, I will be there in person. I want to testify. And I was the only one that showed up in person.
It just seems like the denial of your request to have National Guardsmen who are within eyesight, you saw them, to have them help, that's a pivotal moment on that day. Mm-hmm. And we know the name of the man who made that decision, and we still don't know why he made that decision. And that's just shocking to me. Has he ever answered that question?
No, he's never answered that question specifically that I'm aware of. And I do know when they were talking about the J6 committee coming out, I think it was Representative Benny Thompson that had said Speaker Pelosi is off limits. So they wouldn't get any of her records or phone records.
What do you mean she's off limits?
I believe that was one of the things he said, that her coming into this was she was off limits to the inquiries of the January 6th.
Well, she was running the House that day.
I hear you. If we're truly trying to get to the bottom of this, trying to find out what happened.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, I mean, that's insane.
You would be getting everyone's records. I've been forthright. All my phone records have been turned over. And like I said, there's a description of all the numerous calls I made requesting approval. Think about it. In that 71 minutes, I called in 17 police agencies, 1,700 officers to help us get the Capitol back. And it also made those 11 calls trying to find out where.
You are as precise as an airline pilot in your recollection of things. So yes, I think everything you have said is provable. I mean, these are not.
The book's all based on fact. You can go through it. I reference all the facts I have, footnote. You get access to a lot of the intelligence. I mean, it's fact. And my story hasn't changed in 2.5 years.
So I'm just to circle back to this Paul Irving, who played a pivotal role, I think whose name is unknown to most people, even people who follow what happened on January 6th. What happened to him?
No idea. He disappeared shortly thereafter. Haven't heard much from him. Had a couple of conversations with Mike Stinger before he passed away, but nothing from Mr. Irving.
So he was House Sergeant at Arms, and then when did he leave after January 6th?
So it's interesting. So he officially left the 7th, but his signature is on a document making my assistant chief of intelligence the chief of police on the 8th. It's kind of weird the way it worked, but so I guess he was out the 7th or the 8th.
Was he close to Pelosi?
Oh yes. Was he? Oh yeah. He was a very loyal. It's interesting. He was able to go between Republican and Democrat pretty well. He knew how to
Not a
play
huge
the political
difference
game
on some level.
But he was extremely loyal
to Nancy Pelosi. And it's unclear what happened to him after he left.
No idea.
The Capitol.
Yeah.
Has he done, to your knowledge, we haven't found any, but interviews about?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Was he called to testify before the January 6th committee? Do you know?
I believe he was. I believe there may be. I'm just drawing a blank right now. Written testimony of his. I know he was one of the two that showed up in 2021 for the Senate hearing. He was on video. So was Mike Stinger. And they were asking him about his recollection of when I called him, and he was like, I don't recall that. Now I had my first timing wrong when I went and asked for the initial National Guard. I originally thought it was January 4th, which was Monday. It was January 3rd when he denied me the first time.
Even though he apparently, or certainly federal agencies, had intel suggesting this was going to be a bigger than normal protest and could be violent.
Absolutely. Now, when you look back and you see some of the intel that was out there, and I reference a lot of it in the book, there's intel talking about going up and killing the palace guards. Those are my officers. There are intel talking about using chemicals at some of the entry points. There's intel indicating that they've done surveillance on some of the entry points at the Capitol. None of that's been included. They talk about burning down the Supreme Court. They talk about different attacks on different members of Congress. And they talk about storming the building. Not a single word of that is included in any of the intelligence assessments. And a matter of fact, my intelligence unit is putting out documents on the 4th, 5th, and 6th indicating a low probability of civil disobedience.
What?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were, and I'm not, but if you were conspiracy minded, you might think that certain agencies concluded there was likely to be chaos at the Capitol, and that served their political purposes, and so they let it happen, and they prevented you from stopping it.
When you tie that into a number of other things that happen, and if you haven't, I'd love to take you through some of the military stuff really quick.
And I hope you will at length. And can I just ask, I think most people don't understand that the U.S. military would have a role in a domestic political protest. Why would the U.S. military, which we pay to fight wars abroad, be involved in a protest in the United States?
So the way it would work is, like I said, through a program. A lot of times the military will come out, they'll do support for civil authorities, whether it's COVID response. They did it during the avian flu, but they'll also do it during civil disobedience. We've used them I've activated and sworn in hundreds, if not thousands, of National Guard troops for IMF World Bank, for inauguration. So we'll have them to help line the parade route. just to help us fortify the perimeter. Sometimes they'll have with their QRF, quick response force, in reserve in case we need additional civil disturbance support. So that's how they'll kind of support law enforcement. So 340 were activated for traffic control and management of crowds around like metro stations, so they weren't backed up and stuff like that. Not for specific civil disobedience. So we knew we had National Guard in there. And the Defense Support for Civil Authorities program is, if we become overwhelmed, our backstop for law enforcement, and I used up all my resources, and I was overwhelmed, would have been the military, specifically the National Guard. So 209, I get approval to bring in the National Guard. Probably 210, 211. My first call, well, I've already called General Walker. Called General Walker at 151. I was like, I can't wait any freaking longer. I call him, I said, send me the National Guard as quick as you can. I'm going to get approval any minute, because he asked, do you have approval from the Capitol Police Board? And I said, I'll have approval any minute. Please just get them coming this way. So they're within eyesight. Shortly after 209, I talk to them. 234, I get a notification to get on the call with the United States Pentagon. I have to sell my request for the National Guard. I'm on the call with a Lieutenant General Piat, trying to make sure I have his name pronounced right, and a General Flynn is on the call. And it's mainly Piat that I'm speaking with. I get on the call, Mayor Bowes is on the call, Chief Conti's on the call, and I said, I need the National Guard immediately. This is an urgent situation. I still remember saying urgent twice. This is urgent. And they got to be looking at the same TVs I'm looking at. I need the National Guard immediately. You know what his response is? Don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. He goes, I would rather have your officers in the fight and we can backfill your officers somewhere else. I said, I don't have that option. All my officers are in the fight. He goes, I'm telling you, I don't like the option of the National Guard. I don't like the optics of the National Guard on the Hill. I said, sir, we're having our asses handed to us. This is life or death. I need assistance immediately. And I still remember, he said, my recommendation is not to support the request. And I still remember Robert Conti going, whoa, hold on. You're denying the chief of the Capitol Police? And he comes back and says, not that we're denying him. I just don't like the optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. And he goes, and he goes back to that again, I'd rather backfill your people. I said, sir, I don't have that option.
This sounds like a setup to me. I'm sorry, it does.
It gets better. So I beg, and he goes, well, I'm going to walk down the hall and, we'll talk to the Secretary of Defense or whoever he's going to talk to. Right then I get notification. Oh, so I'm still on the call. We have the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. And I said, we have shots fired. I still remember yelling over the phone. We have shots fired on the USC Capitol. Is that urgent enough for you now? Hang up the phone, because now I got to start making my notifications. I got to call the Sergeant Arms saying, hey, we got what looks like maybe a confirmed shooting. Do you know when the National Guard finally arrived? 6 p.m. 6 p.m. they're sworn in on post. Do you know those National Guard, the 150 to 180 that are within eyesight of the Capitol? You know what they do with them? They put them in vehicles, drive them around the Capitol back to the D.C. Armory. You know where the D.C. Armory is.
It's far away, yeah.
Washington,
Yes.
White House is on one side, United States Capitol, D.C. Armory almost equidistant on the other
RFK
side.
RFK Stadium.
Yeah, over by RFK Stadium. They drive them back then, and they send me in the evening trips.
Not really.
Can you frickin' believe it? No, that's real. That's real. And you know what else they do? While I'm begging for assistance, the Pentagon's sending resources to generals' houses to protect their homes, but not me. So you begin to think, it seems a little conspiratorial. I can see where I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I can see where people begin to go down that rabbit hole real quick.
That rabbit hole? I mean, I don't know what the other conclusion is. Because, look, under pressure, people make mistakes and make bad decisions. But you're describing a systematic denial of intelligence and then of support, defense, through a whole bunch of different agencies, a whole bunch of different people, all reaching the same baffling conclusion that we're not going to protect the Capitol.
Right. Multiple agencies with people with extensive experience, and you're getting this type of response. And when you look at the level of intelligence, it's baffling that nobody put anything out ahead of time.
Maybe it's not baffling. I mean, remember, this was the end of the Trump administration. A month, almost 2 months into a contested election. This is a politically charged moment with ramifications that we're now living through. But there's a lot at stake here. This is not just your average protest, correct?
Correct. There is.
Did you feel that? Did you feel a political vibe coming off these decisions at the time, or were you just so in your law
Oh
enforcement?
no, I was looking at the cameras that were surrounding me with my officers, the men and women of the Capitol Police and the other law enforcement agencies, in a fight for their life. All I wanted to do was get them resources. And I hadn't even sat back and at that point started thinking about the political aspects of it.
I should say, just because this is our second conversation, and I feel like I know you at this point. You're not political. I mean, you were a beat cop who rose and became a chief of police, a very prominent one. And so, but you never, you weren't like working in politics on the side like a lot of these people.
No, and you'll find if you look through it, and I talk about it in the book, I try and be as apolitical as possible.
I can tell.
Because I think that is extremely important in the application of law. I'm a rule of law type of guy, but especially being in Washington, D.C. in special ops, we did demonstrations all the time, First Amendment activity. You have to be apolitical. You got to go in. It doesn't matter. You have a right to First Amendment freedom of speech. It doesn't matter if I agree with you or not, but I have to take an apolitical approach to provide you security. And I believe it's important. You don't need to know what the political leanings of a cop are that's stopping you on a traffic stop. You shouldn't. You should never know that. So I'll always be apolitical when it comes into law enforcement because that's how it has to be.
Amen. So by the time the National Guard actually show up at 6 p.m., they're not needed, correct?
The fight's over. So the whole time they were concerned about the optics of the National Guard showing up. They show up. I have an official swear them in as special police officers. They take them. They line them up with their shields. All the protesters are off. They line them up with their shields, and they take a couple of pictures for military magazines and stuff like that of them lined up with the Capitol in the background. The very optics they said they were so concerned about.
They took pictures for military magazines?
Think about it. You can look it up. You can look up on some of the, go online, look up.
Like we're the heroes of January 6th?
Yeah, hey, we're the heroes of January. Yeah. So, and I appreciate I come from a military family. I appreciate the men and women in military. And I will tell you, when they finally showed up, New Jersey State Police beat them to the Capitol before the D.C. National Guard arrived at the Capitol. I had D.C. National Guards, men and women, that were infuriated. They were so pissed off that they weren't allowed to respond. They were extremely upset.
Wait, cops drove from New Jersey
Yes, sir.
Before the National Guard could
Yes,
get from the Armory on Capitol Hill to the Capitol?
I'd put out a request, a mutual aid request that went all up and down the National Capital Region, went up to...
Why isn't this story everywhere?
I have no idea. General Walker even said, he called me up, he said, Steve, I felt so bad. I pulled up on the scene. He's the head of the D.C. National Guard. He said, I pulled up on the scene and the New Jersey State Police beat us to the Capitol. He said he wasn't allowed to go. He repeatedly wanted to go and the Pentagon wasn't allowing him.
And yet the Pentagon celebrated the guardsmen who showed up at 6 p.m. when everything was done as heroes. Meanwhile, they send other guardsmen to protect the homes of generals.
Yeah, they send other resources. I don't know if they're Guard or Pentagon Force Protection or what, but the kicker is this. The Department of Defense, and they interviewed me. I would have been interviewed by anybody because I'm telling the truth. They interviewed me. I provided them all my phone records. They were part of all the records. They put out a report saying the actions of the United States military was appropriate considering the circumstances.
Was appropriate?
It's online. Yeah, go look up the
No one apologized.
No one apologized. They said
no one was fired.
Their actions were appropriate. They had an emergency response authority under DISCA to respond immediately, and they didn't.
Do you think that the Pentagon was gathering intelligence before and during January 6th?
Well, when you look at the fact that, Milley and Miller, specifically Milley was talking about locking down the city, he had to have some pretty damn concerning intelligence. That's a pretty big stretch for the government, for the military to talk about locking down the capital city and revoking First Amendment permit.
In a democracy, that would be a big stretch.
I mean, that's a big stretch.
It's close to a coup, actually,
Yeah.
at that point.
And then when you hear, about some of the stuff he was getting online and he was only talking to members of Congress, it raised a lot of concerns.
Does the Pentagon, does Defense Intelligence Agency have undercover intel operatives that you're aware of?
I have no idea. And I think it is important, since you bring up the intelligence, it's important for people to realize, again, as the United States Capitol Police, we're not part of the intelligence community, the technical IC. There's 18 agencies. 9 of those agencies are military agencies. So that gives you an idea of how heavily weighted.
Half of the IC is military.
Half of the IC is military. So,
but I think the average person imagines that military intelligence is not allowed constitutionally to function on American soil.
Yeah, you'd think. I don't know
because we're not ruled by a
specifically.
junta.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specifics, but you'd think
But
that it
in
would
your
be.
career, have you seen evidence that the half of the IC, half of those 18 intel agencies, the military ones, are working in the United States?
I've never received, in my times of doing the special events, demonstrations, intel briefings, I've never received intel from the military. So it's always been, the DHS, FBI. It's always been those folks. Never anyone said, "Hey, we got this from military intelligence."
So, in the aftermath of January 6th, there's been a huge debate over to what extent, there were federal agents or people who are working in some way for federal agencies in the crowd. And the initial explanation was, well, none, and you're insane if you think that. You're Alex Jones, you're crazy. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen people in authority confirm, actually, yeah, there were a lot in the crowd that day. I mean, that's now a fact. Did you know that going in?
No.
No. So just for perspective, since you've been to a lot of these events, there's a huge a planned demonstration in Washington, D.C. Will there always be assets, agents, people working for federal agencies in the crowd in civilian clothes?
There always could be, and for like inaugurations, there would usually be some combined teams out there. One for communications, but just for situational awareness. So it wouldn't be surprising. 4th of July, different things like that, where we have threat pictures or concerning threat pictures.
And what does that look like? Does that mean FBI agents dressed in Dockers and tennis shoes trying to?
Well, it'd just be plain clothes. Plain clothes to blend in. So that wouldn't be unusual, and it'd be just standard police work. It'd be good police work. So coming into January 6th, and I talk about it in the book with the fact that shortly after January 6th, I'm driving through Loudoun County. I just talked to somebody from the Hill, and I get a call from overseas, and it's press. I don't remember what it was. It's somebody from Great Britain, and they started asking me about feds in the crowd. And I was like, no, I would have been told. I said, no, we're getting word that there was feds in the crowd. And I said, no, I would have been told. I've got lots of friends with the Bureau. They all have my cell phone number. They would have told me. Thinking about that, and Jill Sanborn's testimony in 2021, where she said they were taking overt action to keep certain people from coming to January 6th to Washington, D.C. That's big for FBI to start taking overt action. I mean, that's not covert, overt. That's a big deal. Fast forward to February of this year, 2023, in the GAO report that says on January 3rd, the FBI was tracking 4 domestic terrorists that were talking about coming to Washington, D.C. The Washington Field Office, their AOR, Area of Responsibility. By January 6th, they were tracking 18 or 19, it's in the GAO report, domestic terrorists. So think about that. They have 18 or 19 domestic terrorists coming to this event. So of course they're going to have resources on them. And they're not, you're not going to be just putting one agent. You're going to have multiples. So it'd be multiple with that. And I don't know how many they actually had coming there. So that would be regular standard police work. So I would be surprised by that, but not to share that in the intelligence, that's concerning.
So, I mean, it seems like common sense suggests anyway that you would have to tell the chief of Capitol Police that, hey, we've got our guys in the crowd. Like, just because, I mean, you would want to know the difference, correct?
You would absolutely want to know the difference. And, deconfliction, you want to have things
right.
like that. A lot of the folks will already know there's a lot of standard procedures for ways you deconflict, so you don't have blue on blue type of situations. You'll have that. I will say this, and just really quick.
So that would just to, because you have perspective, that would be the conventional way the by the book way to do it. FBI would call you and say, hey, we're worried about people in the crowd, and we've got our guys there too. Here's who they are.
Yeah, so just to deconflict operations, they wouldn't necessarily call me. They might call my deputy chief that's in charge of my intel and their
sure, but they would
people.
call Capitol Police.
You would coordinate. You coordinate with DC Police. You'd coordinate with Park Police. You'd coordinate with Secret Service, just so everyone kind of knew what was going on. And really quickly, I do want to say this. Nowhere do I want to imply or indicate that I feel that agents instigated this or in any way like that. I'm never saying that. I haven't said that. And a lot of these agencies came to my defense on January 6th, FBI,
yes.
Secret Service, stuff like that. So we just want to make sure that's clear. But there would have been some coordination. And when you look at it and you think with the intelligence coming in, if you think there's 19 domestic terrorists coming to Washington, D.C., somehow that would have been included in some type of report. And when you look at the FBI's procedures, policies and procedures, and again, go online, Attorney General's guidance for domestic operations of the FBI specifically says the FBI is to do an assessment which includes intelligence assessments of events that they're identifying as being the target of possible threats and possible violence. I think that would have been the United States Capitol on January 6th. Look through that document. I outlined it in the book and see all the repeated failure after failure after failure of their own procedures to start identifying intelligence and making the proper notifications.
So, but it does raise, and I don't have the answer to this question, and I hope I don't ever pretend that I do, but it does raise questions about the behavior of some of the people in the crowd who were instigating others to break the law, and who weren't arrested. And, given our facial recognition software capabilities, hard to believe they can't be found. And I would specifically cite a man called Ray Epps, who's now a hero on the left and funded by the Democratic Party, et cetera. But take the politics out of it. What is that? Here you have a guy on camera repeatedly saying, we're going to the Capitol. And he's not in jail when people who didn't go into the Capitol are in jail? What do you make of that?
Again, that's something I actually addressed in the book. It's funny. There's a lot in here. So my concern with that, and I look at it from a chief of police point of view, is you have somebody that's down, and I believe he's right near the old executive office building on the 5th, the day before January 6th, talking to a group of people, talking about, we have to get into the building. We have to get in the building. And then the next day to see him at what's called the Pennsylvania Avenue Gate. It's one of the two fence lines I had down at the West Front. And he's there, and he clearly sees the banner, the metal crowd control barriers that are up with the signs saying restricted, so he knows that's a restricted area. And he's up there, and you see him lean in, and he whispers in somebody's ear, and he covers his mouth in such a way so you can't read his lips or anything. Whispers in somebody's ear, and that person moments later is attacking my officers. That's suspicious as hell to me. It raised a lot of concerns.
What is that?
And what's interesting is I believe...
and that's verified. The person into whose ear he whispered...
Yeah, I think if you watch the video, you see that, and that person immediately go and start pulling on the gate and start fighting with the officers. And what's interesting is I believe he went on 60 Minutes. And on 60 Minutes, what he said was he went up to the officer and he told that officer, these officers are on our side. Don't hurt these officers. I believe that was pretty much not verbatim. But don't hurt these officers. They're on our side. Don't hurt these officers. Well, if that's the case, why would you cover your mouth and not yell it to everybody? Because it didn't seem like that protester was the only one that was possibly going to be hurting the officers. You had a whole bunch of people next to him. Why wouldn't he tell it to the whole group?
I don't know. I know that Epps is being encouraged by partisan Democrats to sue people who raise these questions, but they're fair questions, and I'm going to raise them anyway. How, given that tape, could the January 6th committee defend Ray Epps, which they did? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm having trouble answering that one. I don't know.
Interesting. How many federal agents, officers, assets, people connected with federal agencies, do you think were in the crowd? Do we have any idea?
I really have no idea.
More or fewer than normal, would you say?
Well, if you have, again, going back to what I'm reading now in the GAO report with 19 domestic terrorists possibly coming in, I've never seen anything like that in Washington, D.C., so you may have a larger than usual presence.
Amazing. Who's Yogananda Pittman?
Yogananda Pittman was my assistant chief for intelligence and security.
Okay. So did she have the intelligence that you didn't have?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. I don't know.
Good point.
I don't know what she had and what she didn't have, but I do know that when you look at it, and we immediately knew. I mean, anybody immediately knew. One of the first things you start thinking about is this an intelligence failure? So think about it. We go through January 6th. I was begging for the National Guard, refused before, refused during it. We get the Capitol under control. I get them to where they can go back into session. 7:30. They elect to go in at 8, and then the House goes in at 9. But nonetheless, so think about this. The very next day, less than 24 hours after we got control of the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi goes on national TV, blames the leadership at the top of Capitol Police, calls for my resignation on national TV, and then lies about me. Okay? The very next day, puts Yogananda Pittman as acting chief.
But Yogananda Pittman, you just described her as the head of intelligence for Capitol Police.
Correct.
So if there was an intelligence failure, which again doesn't seem like a failure, it seems very intentional to me, but if there was such a failure, she'd be responsible, correct? Or she'd be in the chain of responsibility anyway.
Well, I mean, she was the head of intelligence. So if there's an intelligence failure, my thing is, do a proper analysis. Why do a knee-jerk reaction? I mean, putting her in charge. I mean, she ended up getting a vote of no confidence, so she didn't get the position from the police officers because many were upset with what happened.
Where did she wind up?
Where is she now?
Yeah.
She's chief of police for the University of California, Berkeley.
Interesting. So right across from Nancy Pelosi's district.
That is correct,
in the
sir.
Bay Area.
That is correct.
So you just kind of take the Bay Bridge over there, and that's where she is now. What does that position pay? Do you know?
I think it pays pretty well. There was,
pays extraordinarily well.
I'm sure it pays. I'm sure it pays pretty good. It's interesting. There was a hearing just recently that was on TV. You can look at it, where the chief of police, Tom Manger, was asked about her position. It turns out that she was given some type of a secret leave so she could start her job on February 1st as the chief of police and not retire from the Capitol Police for months later.
Oh, so you should get the benefits.
Yeah, think about that. Yeah. It appears to be against departmental policy. And nobody allegedly was told.
What you're saying is that the head of intelligence for the Capitol Police, which demonstrably didn't have the intelligence it needed to protect the building, that person was first elevated to acting chief of Capitol Police and then given a very high-paying job right across from Nancy Pelosi's district at the University of California, Berkeley.
That is correct. And I will say this.
So that looks like a reward to me.
Well, I do know that the unit had significant intelligence. And I know many people within the unit were pushing that intelligence up to the leadership of the unit. So I do know that. Many of them became whistleblowers, and many of them were punished and forced to resign. Yep.
This looks like a scam.
I mean,
just saying.
It just gets more convoluted. I feel so bad for the men and women in the police department, what they went through. I feel so bad for the intelligence analysts and what they went through. Many of them, it was really, really bad. I feel bad for the officials that were either demoted, forced to resign over this, forced to retire early. There's a lot of people that need someone. I think an outside entity needs to come in and do some investigation about what went on with.
We've had many entities doing investigations.
Yeah.
I believe we impaneled this committee or commission, this body of members of Congress that went on for about a year and was on the news every single night. Did they address any of these questions?
No, sir.
How could you have a January 6th commission whose job it is to figure out what happened on January 6th, not get to the bottom of why the head of intelligence at Capitol Police didn't pass on the intelligence, why the chief of Capitol Police was kept in the dark and denied support from the U.S. military, why Yogananda Pittman wound up, after failing on January 6th, getting a high-paying job right across from Nancy Pelosi's district? Who wouldn't ask these questions?
Yeah, well, I know there's people on the Hill still trying to ask those questions, and hopefully they can get answers. But it looks like they keep running into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. But it's hard to believe 2.5 years later, we're still at this point. I still think somebody along the line is going to find, the smoking gun, the missing puzzle piece, and put this together. But it does. When you look at it, and there's still so much more to it, it just begins to raise more and more questions.
It's interesting to talk to you because, this is just my assessment, but you seem like a very straight arrow guy.
I try.
Well, it comes off you in waves. So, and I mean that as a compliment, but how long did it take you to realize there's something very strange going on here?
I knew there was something strange going on pretty soon. When I was running into the issues with them not wanting me to testify, I was like, this starts getting a little weird. And then when I started sitting down and talking to officers and getting information, then finding out from some of the intelligence that was out there and where it was, and seeing some of the emails of the intelligence analysts pushing it up to their officials, I knew something was fishy. I mean, think about it. How can somebody not look at all this and think something's odd?
So, I mean, we have a media whose job it is to get to the bottom of questions like these, or at least to ask the questions of knowledgeable people with relevant experience, and you're at the top of that list. We interviewed you, never aired, at a previous job, but how many other long interviews have you done with media outlets?
Long ones, not very many. I actually can't think of any. I've done 60 Minutes. That's probably about the longest.
And how long, from your 60 Minutes interview, how much of your account wound up on television, do you think? Estimate.
3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes. 3 or 4 minutes. So you're the chief of Capitol Police on January 6th. Common sense suggests you'd be the first person that any reporter trying to figure out what happened on January 6th would call.
You'd think.
Is your cell phone buzzing day and night from
No.
curious reporters trying to find the truth?
No, it's calmed down. I mean, the first couple of days were something else, but it's really calmed down. And I'm not stupid when it comes to law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've done everything from capturing homicide suspects to doing barricade situations. This didn't have to happen. This was screwed up from the get-go. Didn't have to happen. Numerous opportunities to prevent it from happening. Numerous opportunities from preventing my men and women from going through what they had to, and it never happened. There was never that opportunity to stop that train.
There's always a concern that politics will infect law enforcement and the justice system more broadly. And I think you've thought about this. It's one of the reasons I think you said we need to be strictly apolitical in the way we administer law enforcement. It does seem like things have changed. And it does seem like politics affect the way we enforce the law. Does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, and again, that's one of the things many things that are in here. I talk about the 2020 riots versus the January 6th attack.
The riots in front of the White House, where famously St. John's Church was set on fire.
Oh, White House, across the country. I talk about the White House, and I talk about an agency that was formed by Congress specifically for the protection of the United States president, the Washington, D.C. Police Department. The White House is under attack, and they are prevented. They are prevented. I know it's not from Chief Newsom. It's from his, he was the chief at the time. It would have been from above him. They're prevented from going on White House grounds and helping the United States Secret Service with defending the White House. So think about that.
Who made that decision?
Again, all I know is, Newsom's hands were tied. So Mayor Bowser, higher? I don't know. But think about that.
But somebody told and there was real rioting. In fact, I think that more officers were injured at that riot than were injured on January 6th, I think.
Yep. Again, don't take my word, GAO report. More officers injured at the protests up by the White House than on January 6th. And I'm told by Park Police, all charges were dropped, according to the fighting at Lafayette Park and at the White House. There were Secret Service agents bloodied and battered over there. There was a number of federal agencies that were hurt. Structures set on fire. They tried to light the Hay Adams Hotel on fire that was occupied. Think about that. Charges dropped. No such situation. I mean, when you look at the disparity of how justice is being applied, again, that's scary. That becomes really scary when it becomes politicized like that, and that's what appears to have happened.
I mean, it sounds like Trump is the key to all of this. If Trump hadn't been the president, responses would have been very different, don't you think? I mean, if Barack Obama had been president, do you think that someone would have told MPD, the Washington, D.C. Police Department, they couldn't protect the White House?
Again, I protect the White House. I see what you're saying there. I don't know. I mean, I think not.
Look, I mean, it's a hypothetical. I shouldn't ask you to answer hypothetical questions, but it does seems amazing. Last question. Thank you for doing this again. I really appreciate it. I think this is important, and I hope that everyone who's interested in January 6th and its aftermath, which really has changed the country, will watch this interview. But looking back after spending your entire life in law enforcement, how have your views changed after January 6th?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, my views of law enforcement, I still think law enforcement is a very honorable profession. I really, really do. I think it's being screwed up in a lot of cities. I feel bad for a lot of people that are going into it. We need good cops. But right now their hands are being tied. When you look at what law enforcement's going on, I mean, I was just talking with somebody who, one of their officers in Washington, D.C. arrested somebody, went to a scene of a robbery, recovered a weapon, recovered somebody else's wallet in possession with the suspect, made the arrest, papered a gun, went in the person's pocket, and during the search found a loaded handgun, went down to papers, no paper. No paper, armed robbery. Means all charges were dropped. That's bad. That's bad when we're seeing the type of crime that we're seeing in some of these cities, and they're not prosecuting some of these cases. I feel sorry for the officers. It's very dangerous for them. I still love the profession, still love the officers with the Capitol Police, Washington D.C. Police. Still talk to them regularly. They're going through a lot, and I just don't think they're getting the backing they need.
No, they're not, and the effects on the rest of us are
Right, we're seeing it.
Stephen Sund, former chief of Capitol Police. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Tonight, the president of Ukraine showed up in the Congress wearing a green sweatshirt and cargo pants for maximum disrespect and demanded the United States continue to spend more on his country's border security than we spend on our own. That actually happened. It was a pretty cheeky performance if you think about it. But like Sam Bankman-Fried before him, Zelensky put a salesman's gloss on what otherwise might look very much like a scam. So the tens of billions of dollars you'll be sending me is not charity, Zelensky explained. It's not a gift. It's not like the $20 you gave the homeless guy at Union Station this morning for a quart of vodka. No, it's not that at all. This money, Zelensky said, is, quote, an investment. Ooh, an investment. So what exactly are the terms of this investment now that we're talking finance? When do we get our dividend checks? Well, Zelensky didn't specify that, though at one point in his speech he did provide a hint. Are the tens of billions of dollars you're sending me with no audit and no concrete proof of what I'm actually doing with it, will all that money be, quote, enough? Zelensky asked rhetorically. Answer? Not really. Not really. In other words, the return on our investment in Ukraine will be more pitches for more investments in Ukraine. Give me money so I can demand more money. That's what Zelensky promised us last night. And under certain circumstances, that might actually be fine. If nothing else, Zelensky is quite an audacious young entrepreneur with the kind of pluck and fast-talking shamelessness where you think, this guy's either going to wind up in prison or very rich, and maybe both. And there are times when you might want to throw a kid like that a few bucks just to see where it goes. You don't know. But unfortunately, this is not one of those times. The United States is flat out of money, and not just in some abstract PowerPoint presentation kind of way where we show you graphs of the national debt, and then we all pretend to be shocked and horrified. No, no, no. The United States is broke in a real way, meaning we can no longer afford to take care of our citizens. For example, 15 million Americans are about to lose their health care coverage under Medicaid. Now, these are people who got coverage during COVID, but will now lose that coverage thanks to a provision in the $1.7 trillion spending bill that's about to become law. As CNBC reports, governors of various states have informed the Biden administration that the cost of keeping all those people on Medicaid is, quote, too high. And it is high. Undoubtedly, it is high. How high is it? Well, over the last 3 years since COVID began, the federal government spent about $100 billion on extra Medicaid payments to Americans. That's a lot of money. How much is it? Well, it turns out that $100 billion is roughly what Congress has sent to our fast-talking Ukrainian friend in the sweatshirt in less than a single year. Just for comparison, just so you would know what the priorities are in Washington. Your health care is just too expensive, sorry, and your border is too. Can't afford it. But for the strong man who runs Ukraine, no cost is too high. That's real. Does that frustrate you? Does hearing the details infuriate you as a citizen? Imagine if you went to Congress to plead your case. Maybe you showed up in a sweatshirt to tell them what you think. I'm an American citizen, you might say. I've lived here my entire life. I've paid taxes. I've followed the law. I've supported the system my grandfathers built because I believed in that system. And now, because corrupt ghouls like Janet Yellen at the Fed so completely devalued the US dollar and so completely hollowed out our economy, I can no longer afford to go to the doctor as an American citizen. Please help me. So if you showed up on the floor of the House of Representatives wearing a sweatshirt and said that, what kind of response do you think you would get? Would the response look anything like this?
I assure you that Ukrainian soldiers can perfectly operate American tanks and planes themselves. Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way.
We're handling your money in the most responsible way. Take our word for it. Take our word for it. Ho, 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 they laugh. And they clap like seals. But here's the interesting thing. Almost every person in the room clapped like a seal. So no matter what that man said, send me more money, I command you, send me more money, we're taking care of it the most responsible ways. They applaud, all of them, almost like they have to. Now, there are 435 members of the House of Representatives, and they're Republicans and Democrats, and famously they don't get along and they don't agree on anything. They can't even pass a budget because they disagree on everything, very bitterly. And yet, when a foreign leader shows up in cargo pants to tell them lies and give them orders, they all applaud. That's pretty weird behavior in a democracy if you think about it. The fractious debate we hear so much about doesn't exist. And in fact, looking at the screen last night, it didn't really look like a democracy, to be honest. It looked like this. Oh, yes, good point. Good point, sir. Oh, we're so pleased you're here. Throw your foreign flag on the dais and we'll applaud more. That's honestly what it looked like last night. You gotta clap, you can get in trouble if you don't clap, so everyone just claps all the time. Clapping is mandatory as long as Zelensky's speaking. Now, there were a few who didn't obey. That would include Matt Gaetz of Florida, Lauren Boebert of Colorado. And when they didn't stand up and applaud, they found out the hard way what happens to people who dare not to applaud. NBC News took off right after them. That was the headline for NBC. Its House historian, Michael Beschloss, declared this, quote, "For any members of Congress who refuse to clap for Zelensky, we need to know from them exactly why. We need to know why." Ooh, thought crime alert. You've been reported as not applauding. Explain yourself, plebe. And then Beschloss went on television to drive home the point. Our sources have reported you are not clapping. Watch this.
And I think the other thing I'd like to ask is the number of members of Congress, almost all Republican, who did not show up tonight or who showed up and refused to clap. I'd like to know why that was for two reasons. Number one, you're a public servant. We're allowed to know those things. You're supposed to tell us if you're serving in Congress what the reason was. You know, do you love Putin, or are you just opposed to democracy, or is there something else?
We have a right to know why you didn't clap. We have a right to know your thoughts. You thought you were a free person, able to make decisions for yourself. You could love or hate whoever you wanted in a free country, but no! Michael Beschloss has a right to know why you feel the way you do. Do you love Putin? Why wouldn't you clap for a man who banned a Christian denomination, a man who arrested priests, raided monasteries, seized churches, outlawed opposition media outlets, outlawed political parties that oppose him, threw his primary political opponent in jail? Why wouldn't you applaud for a man like that? Do you love Putin? Are you opposed to democracy? Explain yourself. That's what he's saying. That's what they're all saying. It's absurd. What they're describing is the opposite of democracy. There's no democracy in Ukraine, obviously. Banning a Christian denomination? Shut up! But he did. So why all the hysteria? You got two people who didn't clap for a foreign dictator, and Michael Beschloss gets red in the face. Why? Oh, almost everybody clapped for him, but a couple people didn't, and Michael Beschloss can't handle that. What's going on here? Is it possible that the more ludicrous the lie they tell you, the fewer questions they can tolerate about it, the less dissent they can put up with? Because they fear the whole edifice might crumble if they allow one person to ask one reasonable question. It's possible that's what's happening. Remember when Joe Biden told us about Nord Stream? There were two stories. The first story was Joe Biden promised to blow up Nord Stream, the pipeline that brought natural gas from Russia to Western Europe. He's going to blow it up. Do you remember that? You're not allowed to remember it, but we remember it, and we saved the tape. Here it is.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
But how will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Yeah, So he said it on tape. I'm going to do to that pipeline what I did to Corn Pop at the pool at Wilmington. I'm going to take a chain to it. So he promises to destroy the pipeline, and then so does his number two at the State Department, Tory Newland, will destroy the pipeline, and then the pipeline is destroyed. And that hurts Russia. It eliminates Russia's leverage over Europe. Okay, so we know how that happened, but no, they told us. Russia did it. Putin blew up his own pipeline. That's how evil he is. That's how much destruction he wreaks. He doesn't just attack others, he attacks himself. Okay now. That's what they told us, and some of us had questions about it. Is that really what happened? Oh, Michael Beschloss and his friends didn't like that. Anyone who asked questions about what happened to Nord Stream, which, by the way, sent more carbon into the atmosphere than any man-made event in history, so if you care about the climate, maybe be a little worried about what just happened to Nord Stream. If you suggested that the administration, the Biden administration, had anything to do with that, including prior knowledge of it, you were a Russian agent. Really? Is that right? Can you fill us in a little bit more? No, you're working for Putin. Foreign Policy magazine, which used to be a real magazine, called any questions about what happened in Nord Stream a Kremlin talking point. Wow. Could it be they were lying? Oh, yeah, they were lying. Oh, they were lying. The Washington Post, of all places, now reporting, and we're quoting, some Western officials now doubt the Kremlin was responsible. Oh, you think? There's, quote, no conclusive evidence that Russia is behind the Nord Stream attack. Okay, so it's a binary here. It's Russia against a Western coalition led by the United States. So either Russia blew up the Nord Stream pipeline or the Biden administration had a hand in blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Those are your two options. So if Russia didn't do it, then the people who suggested maybe the Biden people were behind it were 100% right. So you'd think in a free country, in a democracy, you would get to discuss that in public, but you can't. And the press corps is not going to help you. They don't ask questions. We don't have that anymore. Here's what we have.
Politicians and the press often toss around comparisons to Winston Churchill, but this time, minus the cigar and the whiskey, it fits.
President Biden face to face with the man who has drawn comparisons to Winston Churchill.
And in a dramatic wartime appearance reminiscent of Winston Churchill in World War II.
This was historic. Some people have compared it to when Churchill came.
Zelensky is very much acting in the Churchillian tradition.
What could be a Churchillian moment?
I mean, he is a modern Winston Churchill with an iPhone.
Someone who probably is the most courageous and inspirational leader since Winston Churchill.
Where Winston Churchill stood generations ago, so too President Zelensky stands.
So you're almost saying that Zelensky's got a harder job than Churchill had.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
This is a historical figure. This guy actually can be compared to Winston Churchill, the Lincoln in 1860.
So that kind of solves a mystery from last night. How can any self-respecting American sit there when some foreign dictator shows up wearing his workout clothes in the U.S. Congress and starts demanding, with a very apparent lack of gratitude, that we send him tens of billions of dollars when we're running out of money? How could you sit and put up with that? And then drapes a Ukrainian flag in our Congress. How could you put up with that? Well, because you're not a self-respecting American. You have no self-respect. You have no dignity. You don't care. You'll say anything. You'll tell any lie. You'll repeat any talking point. And when someone from the DNC or the White House sends you a note by text saying, compare him to Churchill, you do. Because you have no self-respect. That's the problem. So while millions of Americans can't afford to go to the doctor and we have no border, our leaders and our media are imagining they're very close to Winston Churchill. All right. So this is clearly some sort of weird psychodrama that our ruling class is engaging in that gives meaning to their otherwise barren lives. The problem is there are potential consequences that could end the world. So the other day, Lindsey Graham came out, the Republican from South Carolina, and said that he agreed with Joe Biden and Zelensky. The real goal is not to move Russian troops out of Ukraine back to pre-February borders. The real goal is regime change in Russia. Watch this.
How does this war end? When Russia breaks and they take Putin out, anything short of that, the war is going to continue. To ask the Ukrainians to give Russia part of their country after all this death and destruction is not going to happen. To signal a ceasefire, Russia will take the opportunity to rearm and come at them again. So we're in it to win it. And the only way you're going to win it is to break the Russian military and have somebody in Russia take Putin out.
So it's really hard to overstate how crazy this is, and you don't want to play shrink and wonder about, you know, what emptiness at the core of Lindsey Graham's personal life causes him to identify so strongly with a country he's not a citizen of. Something's going on there. But the effect is incredibly reckless and crazy. Take out Putin. Putin's bad, kill him, fine. What happens then? Well, the world's largest landmass falls into ungovernable chaos. And that country has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. What happens to all those weapons? In a country with a lot of people who hate us, Lindsey Graham has no idea. He doesn't care. He's not interested. He's not going to be here to find out. And none of the lawmakers who clapped yesterday had any idea either. They're clapping for regime change. They're clapping for an uncertain and incredibly dangerous future. It's not getting the Russian military out of Ukraine. It's much more than that. And they don't want to know more. And you know what they don't care about? You. Your health care, your southern border, your children, your schools, your country. They don't care. Matt Gaetz is one of the very few members of Congress, as noted earlier, who didn't follow the rules and stand up and applaud like a seal as the foreign leader in a sweatshirt lectured our country. He joins us now to explain his thought crime. Matt Gaetz, thanks so much for coming on. How did you, now, you know what? I'm just going to channel Michael Beschloss here. First of all, how dare you? Okay? When a foreign dictator shows up in the Congress on your knees, okay, that's what Americans do. Second, I'm going to ask you, how much do you love Putin that you didn't applaud last night?
Well, let's start with Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham has no problem sending $100 billion to Ukraine so that we can weigh in on which guy in a sweatsuit gets to rule Crimea. I mean, I feel no compunction to go out and applaud some foreign leader from a historically corrupt country who is begging for more than the $100 billion that the Congress is already set to send them. Now, when President Trump said that America would never be a socialist country, you saw Democrats sit on their hands. But when we say you shouldn't send endless amounts of money to this place where we are exacerbating death and conflict, it's like we're traitors to the movement because Lauren Boebert and I didn't stand up in some sort of North Korea-style performance. And it really makes you wonder, what was all of this for? I think that Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi wanted to bring Zelensky there to the Congress to provide air cover for an otherwise totally indefensible spending bill. And you could see why Zelensky was in for the grift. He's got a lot riding on it. $12.9 billion in this bill to prop up the Ukrainian economy. $300 million for Ukrainian agriculture. Another $300 million for Ukrainian border patrol. And in the same bill, we are tying the hands of our own border patrol. So Ukraine gets economic development, agriculture, border patrol, and we get racial equity mandates for us here at home. So Washington actually thinks that they should go to great lengths to keep Ukraine whole, while at the same time funding the balkanization and division within our own country. And I'm not sorry that Lauren Boebert and I won't stand for it.
No. And by the way, I have much more respect for Maxine Waters, who I don't like and vehemently disagree with, because she's a fellow American. We're both citizens. We both grew up here. This guy has nothing to do with our country. Get what he can. I get it. I'm not even mad at him. I'm mad at the people who instinctively bow before some uppity foreigner demanding money that we don't have, and they should be absolutely ashamed. And anyone who criticized you for acting like an American should be doubly ashamed, and that means you, Michael Beschloss, you craven.
Well, Tucker, at least we found a flag the Democrats were willing to stand for on the floor of the United States Congress. That was a revealing moment.
Exactly. I appreciate your coming on. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's official. You knew this was coming. Sam Bankman has been freed. Sorry, can't resist. Bankman-Fried's out of jail after committing the largest financial fraud in modern history. Today, he was released on $250 million bail by Judge Gabrielle Gorenstein. This is the same judge who let Bernie Madoff out of jail in 2008. Now, you're probably wondering, where did Sam Bankman-Fried get all that money? Because just a couple of weeks ago, he claimed he only had $100,000 in his checking account. Watch this.
How much money do you have left at this point?
To my knowledge, like close to nothing. I mean, basically everything was just in the companies. I mean, it's...
You didn't put away some money somewhere?
No, I don't have any, hidden funds here. Everything I have, I'm disclosing, and I'm down to, I think I have one working credit card left. I think think there might be $100,000 or something like that in that bank account.
So where did the money come from? $250 million bond. We've read it's the highest in American history. How do you get out of jail? Well, apparently it was all fake. It was for the headlines. This was just a signature bond. Just sign their name, no cash. His parents, who apparently used funds from this Ponzi scheme to buy $120 million in real estate, we read that too. They put up their personal home as collateral, not the $120 million real estate portfolio they bought. No, it's fake. They're making you think that this guy's really being punished. There's no bail at all, actually. Just a promise. Meanwhile, Bankman-Fried's girlfriend has apparently flipped on him. To put all this together, we go to Vivek Ramaswamy. He's the author of Nation of Victims and critically a business guy in the world of finance who actually understands this unlike us. Vivek, thanks so much for coming on. This seems, so for the, look, I don't wish anybody prison time, but you got to compare how he's being treated to how people who trespassed in the Capitol 2 years ago have been treated, some of whom are still in jail, and you think maybe this is kind of an inside game. Maybe it is rigged.
Well, there is a trick here, Tucker, and you put your finger on it. The New York Times incorrectly tweeted earlier this evening that he was released on $250 million bail. That is dead wrong. It is a bond because $250 million wasn't actually put up. It was just an equity interest in his parents' $4 million home. So it may as well have been.
So it's like his business itself. It's totally fake.
Exactly. That's the whole point. The whole thing is a smokescreen. It is an optical illusion. And why did they do it? It's because it makes the prosecutors look good. It makes them look like they're being tough, making the highest possible bond in American history. Guess what? If he flees, it could have been $10 trillion. Nobody's putting up that money. And the whole thing is a story of smokescreens, from the do-good smokescreen of SBF and effective altruism and the good ESG scores, now to the prosecutors, just like SBF, pretending like they're participating in a modern Charles Dickens novel where everyone is a caricature of themselves, playing their own role. And this was all about today, the prosecutors puffing their chest at something that was an optical illusion all the way down.
But why not? God, you're blowing my mind here. And I'm thinking, like, what's real? Well, my children are real. God is real. This Perrier is real, but like everything else seems fake, I have to say. But let me ask you, why not treat him like the January 6th defendants? Why not like punish him? He seems like someone who committed the biggest financial crime in history. Why would they want to be lenient on him?
Well, look, he bought a partial insurance policy, Tucker. He didn't buy the full insurance policy, but the partial insurance policy he bought was to be one of the good guys, advocating for effective altruism and responsible regulation, shelling out tens of millions of dollars of actually likely stolen money to the Democratic Party, flaunting it to become one of the good guys. Now, I say it's a partial insurance policy because he actually pledged $1 billion. He only ended up ponying up 30 to 40 million of that, so some Democrats were upset at him for it. But it's the genteel way the game is played. In fact, prosecutors rarely actually will have reached this deal without quite possibly proposing it together with him with that consent. So everybody gets something out of the trade. He gets a nice little sweetheart bail/actual bond deal while the prosecutors come out looking like they were tough. Everyone gets something out of the trade except the actual asymmetry in how we treat this defendant versus others.
It's so distracting. All afternoon I'm thinking, where to get the money? Where to get the money? And then you realize, as with his business, there is no money. It's all fake.
There was no money. Amen. You got it.
Vivek, thank you so much for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. So much grim news. We decided that for Christmas, we would put together a truly hilarious Christmas special, and we have. We'll show you a preview in just a minute. As we told you a minute ago, the Washington Post, for some reason, is finally letting you know that actually the Biden administration really was behind the destruction of Nord Stream 2. Wow. But they're also admitting the truth about COVID and lockdowns. Really? So we've gone back, found one of our favorite guests from the height of COVID, the owner of Attila's Gym in New Jersey, to explain his response to hearing what he knew was true already. We'll be right back. Post, right before Christmas, when no one's paying attention, is finally admitting some truths out of character for them. Turns out Russia did not blow up its own natural gas pipeline. The Biden administration was behind that. Duh! But they're also being a little more honest about COVID. They're finally conceding that it's vaccinated people, not unvaccinated, the vaccinated, who make up the majority of deaths from COVID. Did you know that? Its readers now do. And they're also saying, furthermore, that regular exercise protects people from dying of COVID. So the obvious question is, why did we lock down all the gyms and threaten to put their owners in prison? And that's a question the owners of the Attilas gym in New Jersey have been asking for years. In August of 2020, they broke into their own gym to keep it open in defiance of the lockdown. So again, they weren't selling liquor. It wasn't a weed dispensary. It wasn't a strip club or a casino. They would have been open with the state's consent had it been any of those things. It was a gym. They just want to let people exercise. That was it. And they were threatened with prison for doing that. Ian Smith was until recently one of the owners of the Attilas gym. He's the author of the new book, Find Your Hill. And we are always happy to have him on the show. He's back tonight. Ian, thanks so much for coming on. So I know you're not waiting around to be vindicated by the Washington Post, but how does it feel to hear the obvious stated in public? Exercise is actually good for you.
You know, Tucker, it's infuriating. You've had me on the show probably a dozen times, and I think you and I at least have had this conversation at least 6 times. It was something that we knew all along. And, you know, I read this article, and they call it an eye-opening study. Nothing about this study is groundbreaking in any sense. In fact, it's elementary school level knowledge. You know, when I was in 3rd grade, I was taught that exercise and eating right meant that I was going to be healthy and not get sick. And we all knew that going into 2020, and for some reason, the established science was wiped clean and replaced by, you know, the experts of COVID who did pretty much everything the opposite. You know, you said casinos and bars were open, gyms and churches were closed. They even closed parks and oceans. And all of these things we know have a great benefit on your health, not just in respect to COVID, but in health overall. And we watched Americans' health decline over the last 2 years while the government would not step back on these restrictions and held onto them in places like New Jersey and California and other blue states for as long as they possibly could, even when all the science had been concluded.
I wish we had more than 30 seconds, but I just have to ask you, like, what do you think the motive was? Why would you continue to sell alcohol but not let people exercise in the name of health? Like, why?
You know, I think that we have to start asking that question, and the American people need to start looking at COVID protocol and the reaction to COVID as a crime scene and not a series of mistakes by our government.
And pretty ominous, actually. I mean, they were trying to hurt people and make them weaker. And we don't even know all the facts yet with the vaccines, and they did. Ian Smith, I appreciate your coming on tonight. I'm glad you're not in jail. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Canada is banning all guns because it's not a dictatorship. No, calm down, conspiracy nut. Justin Trudeau even banned the notorious Buttmaster. You know the Buttmaster. Many mass shootings committed with the Buttmaster. Wait, what is the Buttmaster? Well, we found the guy who designed the Buttmaster, whose firearm has just been banned. And we're going to ask him in just a minute, what's the Buttmaster and why is it so dangerous? We'll be right back. About Donald Trump's tax returns for years now, like 6 years now. When you see what's in his tax returns, personal checks from Vladimir Putin, but you couldn't see him because people's tax returns are private. That's sacrosanct. But not with Donald Trump, because he's a bad man. So the normal laws don't apply, and Congress just grabbed his tax returns and then released them to the public. And you know what they show? They show that he got poorer in public service. Probably the only president in modern history who got poorer while serving as president. Compare that to Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell, both of whom have gotten very rich in, quote, air quotes now, public service. Trump lost tens of millions of dollars. So it's not really a bombshell. It's actually kind of a case for Trump, isn't it? How is it not? How did Mitch McConnell get so rich? Does anyone ask that? No. Good question, though. But MSNBC is not going to let this story die because it's about Trump. They know there's something criminal lurking in those tax returns, something the IRS just wasn't able to find. So MSNBC decided to bring in the top expert in the world on hiding financial fraud from the IRS. No, it's not a forensic accountant. It's Al Sharpton.
A lot of those contributions, I understand, he claimed that were in cash, which is interesting in of itself. Why was he making cash contributions? Is not the committee concerned about preserving the dignity and standards of the presidency that has been tainted by this Trump presidency?
You got to hand it to the MSNBC programming department. Someone's got to talk about tax fraud. Who do we have here? Anybody? Oh, Al Sharpton, who pleaded guilty to not paying taxes. And then after that, got caught stashing his money in one of his companies for several years so the feds wouldn't find it. And was an FBI informant, and then looted every charity he's run. His Harlem nonprofit, the National Action Network, just paid him $1 million in 1 year in salary. Then, if you've been following his long and sordid and admittedly hilarious career, you'll recall the time that he admitted under oath that his ministry purchased everything he owned. Not himself, his ministry. They purchased his watch and the Italian suits in his closet. So he's the guy they bring in to assess Donald Trump's tax fraud. Pretty funny, no? A little funny? Pretty funny. Well, Justin Trudeau. 9/11 was, well, 21 years ago, but for a lot of people, it's still an open case. They don't know everything they need to know. And that would include the families of people who died on 9/11. And for years, they've been suing Saudi Arabia. They believe the Saudi government had a role in those attacks. And they've been frustrated for years because the government won't declassify the information they need to make that case. Why are they hiding that? So the Biden administration just came out fairly recently and said we've declassified all relevant documents. And we wanted to know if that's true. So Bret Eagleson is the president of 9/11 Justice. His father died at the World Trade Center that day, and he's been leading the effort in court to get to the truth. Bret Eagleson joins us now. Bret, thanks so much for coming on. So the Biden administration made this big announcement. We're releasing all the relevant files. It's hard for a layman to know if all the relevant files have been released. Have they been?
No, in fact, they haven't. And I will point to the most relevant files of all relevant files are the 28 Saudi government official depositions that occurred in our lawsuit that's happening in Southern District of New York. There were 28 witness interviews conducted by Saudi kingdom officials that we have a judge and an FBI and a DOJ that ensures that those depositions never become public. In fact, the most egregious thing is that 9/11 families can't even know what these witnesses said. Our lawyers can't even share that with us. So we're under this sick and disgusting protective order where you have a judge, two judges in fact, in the Southern District of New York, keeping everything about this case under lock and key. It is by design. The United States government, the deep state of this government, does not want America at large to know what the Saudi role was in 9/11, and we've been struggling for 21 years for a champion, for somebody with a backbone to stand up against the thugs that are the kingdom of the Saudi Arabia, and to this day, nobody has done it. From administration to administration, nobody has had the courage or the backbone to do what's right. In the land of justice and democracy and freedom, no one has risen to that occasion, Tucker. It's atrocious.
Americans should be outraged by this. It was our country. 3,000 Americans were murdered that day. There is no justification for keeping any file pertaining to 9/11 secret. They complain about conspiracy theories. Why do we have them? Because they continuously lie to us from behind the veil of secrecy. Quick question, is any member of Congress carrying your banner on this?
Well, I do want to give kudos to Congress today. They finally passed in a bipartisan way. Congress came together today in a very strong way, and they voted 94 senators to 1 to provide some modicum of justice to the victims of terror, by and large. So I just wanted to say that kudos to Congress, but we need an administration or a government to stand up for us.
Yeah, stop lying to us. Tell us the truth. We'll be right back. Bret, thank you. Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. This is, believe it or not, one of our last shows of 2022. So naturally, we got to thinking about the year that was. What defined it? Well, if you're living a healthy life, of course, your relationships defined it. Politics is never the most important thing. The people around you are. Your family, your friends, your dogs. That's where joy comes from, not from elections. Your relationships mean much more to you than any stupid pronouncement Nancy Pelosi made over the last year from her compound in Napa. But still, politics do matter. They're not irrelevant. Nancy Pelosi's babblings do have an effect on your life. So what defined the politics of 2022? Well, lying did. This was the year of lying. The people in charge tell an awful lot of lies. That's what we learned. And we know this for sure because while they are avid and committed liars, they're not very good at it. Their lies are amateurish, obvious, pathetic, sad. And there's something kind of insulting about that. Don't take a leak on my boots and tell me it's raining, goes the old cowboy phrase. Don't tell me something we both know isn't true and expect me to believe it. When you do that, you assault my dignity. You diminish me. You treat me like a child. If you're going to tell me a lie, put some effort into it. Try something clever. Have pride of craftsmanship. Don't pull the same old dusty alibi off the shelf like a jar of expired spaghetti sauce and expect me to fall for it again. Oh, we can't tell you that, Mr. and Mrs. America. It's a matter of grave national security, but don't worry. Everything's totally fine. We're doing a great job. They've been trying that for, 21 years now with the still somehow secret 9/11 files, and for nearly 60 years with the JFK assassination. At this point, no living American still believes them, and none should. But they keep doing it anyway. Clearly, they think we have brain damage. It's frustrating to watch. But today, we've decided to be amused by it. That seemed like the more positive option, maybe the most positive available under the circumstances. So here, ladies and gentlemen, are our favorite lies of 2022. We had an awful lot to choose from in making tonight's list, from Paul Pelosi's late-night crime scene to the endless propaganda about the Ukraine war, to the million non-existent Americans who actually didn't get new jobs in the third quarter of the year. But we're going to start with what might be the dumbest lie ever told. Vladimir Putin blew up his own natural gas pipeline to Europe. Now, by doing this, Putin crippled his own economy and weakened his own strategic position in the middle of a war. But he did it anyway because, just because that's the kind of evil behavior Vladimir Putin is famous for. He's so evil. He's not only a threat to us, a direct physical peril to Omaha, Bangor, and San Jose. Vladimir Putin is so evil, he's an existential threat to himself. Stop that man before he blows up more of his own pipelines. That's what the media told us with a completely straight face. Watch.
How does this fit into Putin's playbook? Of course, as you would expect, Susan, Russia says, oh, we had nothing to do with this. We're going to launch an investigation. But come on.
Look, the indications are that foul play was involved and that it appears that, Russia is certainly the likeliest suspect of this.
I think this is clearly an act of sabotage of some sort, and Russia is certainly the most likely suspect. I think this might be just the first salvo of some additional things that might be coming toward Europe.
What Putin is saying to us with by blowing up his pipeline is, look, I can blow up a pipeline. If need be, I can blow up the internet cables coming into your country. I can blow up functioning pipelines. I can do all sorts of stuff.
If I can kill myself, I can do anything. Russia is certainly the most likely suspect, says John Brennan. And you can trust him when he says that because John Brennan was Barack Obama's CIA director. There's nothing shady about that guy. He's never been involved in any illegal murders or anything. He's got your best interest at heart. Let's put him on TV as a reliable foreign policy expert. He'll tell us the truth. You've got to laugh at this because, what's the option? And actually, John Brennan turns out to be reliable in at least one sense. If John Brennan says it, the opposite is almost certainly true. And that was the case here. No, Russia did not blow up its own pipelines. That explosion was the work of the Biden administration. They signed off on it. And we can tell you that tonight with confidence. The only remaining question is, now that we know for a fact that Joe Biden intentionally released more carbon into the atmosphere than any human in recorded history, can he continue to lecture the rest of us about global warming? We're thinking, oh yeah, he can. Biden certainly has the main quality. That's also the pleasure in watching the Sam Bankman-Fried saga unfold. Bankman-Fried was this weird pudgy kid in a t-shirt who played video games during interviews, took a ton of pills, and could never quite explain the business model of his, quote, crypto exchange. I mean, literally, from the first day, this guy was an utterly transparent scam artist. Your golden retriever could have smelled the fraud on this guy. It was that redolent. He stunk of it. But somehow the geniuses, the financial wizards at CNBC had no idea. They fell in love with Sam Bankman-Fried. They wanted to be Sam Bankman-Fried. They told us Sam Bankman-Fried was the new J.P. Morgan. Here's a tape we're going to watch at least once a month for the rest of our lives. It's that good.
They call him the J.P. Morgan of crypto, right?
Yeah, the Michael Jordan of crypto, if you will.
Of this generation. Sam.
Libraries, yes. That wasn't 10 years ago. That was weeks, days before the Sam Bankman-Fried fraud collapsed in on itself. Is he Vanderbilt? Is he Harriman? Is he Carnegie? Is he J.P. freaking Morgan? No! No, he's not. Actually, he's an accused felon who just this week was photographed shuffling along in handcuffs on his way to his cell. It's just so awesome. These people are ridiculous. And that's the real lesson of Sam Bankman-Fried. And we're going to enjoy every second of it. Now, it's a little harder to enjoy what's happening to the rest of the economy, inflation especially. Inflation is one of those economic phenomena you don't need to be an MIT professor to identify. Has the price of things you buy every week gone up a lot? Oh, it has? Okay, you've got inflation. Inflation is demonstrable. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying, and everybody knows that. And that's why even most politicians, people who will lie about anything, don't bother to lie about inflation. It's just too easy to catch them. But some still persist in lying about it. They just enjoy the experience of lying. It makes them feel alive. Janet Yellen is one of those. Watch her here tell you that the inflation you're experiencing every day is not real. It's a mirage. It's, quote, transitory.
We've had several months of high inflation that most economists, including me, believe will be transitory. I personally believe that this represents transitory factors.
Are higher prices here to stay?
I believe it's transitory, but I don't mean to suggest that these pressures will disappear in the next month or two. It is important that we monitor it carefully, but I believe fundamentally, that this is something that will settle down.
Transitory.
Transitory.
Did you hear that? She's an economist. She's not a scam artist who got rich from bribes disguised as speaking fees from the big banks after she had been running the Fed. No. She's an economist. And because she's an economist and you're not, she knows that there are many kinds of inflation. There's conventional inflation, then there's something called transitory inflation. And that's the kind of inflation you're not allowed to complain about, especially before midterm elections. You are commanded to ignore that kind of inflation. And if it still bothers you, then you have to do your patriotic duty and get an abortion. That's the word from Janet Yellen, who as of tonight is literally our Treasury Secretary. So, Merry Christmas, much lied to American people. At least you know who we're dealing with now. The good news is we can still be happy. Happiness is a gift from God, and even the Biden administration can't take it away. Jason Whitlock is a happy man. He's the host of Fearless. He joins us tonight. Jason, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, you got to admit, the upside to their lying is there's no question about what it is. They don't even try.
They don't, Tucker. I loved your list, but you left a few things off.
Yes, a lot.
Well, listen. Ukraine, they released this blockbuster movie, Top Gun Maverick, The Ghost of Kiev, that fighter pilot that shot down Boris Yeltsin, Nikita Khrushchev, Vladimir Putin. And then when he crashed his plane, he hopped out of it and beat up Ivan Drago. You got to remember that lie, of course. The other one that I was big on, you mentioned it briefly, but I still think there's meat on the bones with Paul Pelosi. This guy remakes MC Hammer's You Can't Touch This into You Can Touch This, Hammer Time. That's one of the biggest lies. What about the on the border with the people with the whip? They were whipped. It reminded people, it gave everybody slavery flashbacks of the immigrants. And this was, and then on a more serious note, just for me, and because we're so close to Christmas, the January 6th committee. Yeah. That's, to me, is the biggest lie we got going on in America. And we're so close to Christmas. And I think about those people that are locked up and being treated like they were George Floyd rioters and looters when they were really just going to confront the politicians that they were frustrated with. So that would have been my list, Tucker.
You know, you're so right. And I was going to include that, but honestly, it made me so mad I couldn't write anything funny about it. Honestly. But we can be happy anyway. And Jason Whitlock, we are grateful for you and your appearances so often on this show. They really make a difference. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Winter storms are disrupting a lot of things in the country, especially air travel. Something called a bomb cyclone, they're telling us, is now in progress. Fox's Mike Tobin is at Chicago's O'Hare Airport with the very latest. Mike Tobin, thanks for joining us. What's going on there?
Well, you know, in terms of bodies piling up at the airport, Tucker, it never really got that bad. And I got to give a tip of the hat to the airlines because they communicated with the travelers when the flights were being canceled, when they were being delayed. It's a little different on the other side of security because you got a lot of people who couldn't get on their connecting flights. But what is a bomb cyclone? It's a weather phenomenon when you have a low-pressure system colliding with a high-pressure system. It drives down a bunch of cold air, creates a bunch of wind, and usually precipitation. It is marked by a drop in the barometer of 24 millibars over a 24-hour period. Now, I've been tracking it. I've tracked 14 millibars. So, unfortunately, for all the suffering, I think we're going to fall a little short of earning your bomb cyclone merit badge. We'll leave the final call to the meteorologists. I'm just a hack at these things. What you did get is a lot of flight cancellations. Seattle-Tacoma Airport in particular. They got dumped on with freezing rain, and that iced over the runways. And the ice is actually harder to get off the runways than the snow. So they had to shut down the whole airport. And that meant Alaska Airlines canceled all of their flights out of Seattle and Portland as well. By noon today, you had just about 4,000 flights that were canceled. So the ripple effect impacted pretty much all the major air carriers and every airport. If you're one of the people who made it home on time, you're one of the lucky ones.
Unfortunately, last night, we were scheduled to leave out about 7:50 this morning. Yes. We got a text last night saying they rescheduled us to Austin at 12 o'clock today with a layover. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to avoid this line, and we're just trying to get home. This is a mess.
We were originally meant to fly to Toronto from London, England, last night, and our flight was canceled. Then we rebooked to Detroit today, but that was canceled as well. So we just tried to get another flight to Toronto or Detroit, and there's nothing left for us.
So the system didn't create too much snow. It did create a lot of cold. It created a lot of wind. It drove the snow around last night, made it really treacherous to see if you were trying to drive. Today, the roads aren't that bad, but it is cold, cold, cold. So I'm talking to you right now, -5 in Chicago with a wind chill of -30. Tucker?
So bad, but not as bad as it might have been, which makes it good. And we appreciate that good news from you, Mike Tobin. Thank you. Well, Sam Bankman-Fried, of course, is a scam artist. Looks like he pulled off the biggest financial fraud in history. He's already out of jail, though, on $250 million bond, which actually turned out to be fake. He didn't have to pay a cent. His parents put up their relatively modest $4 million house as collateral, and that somehow covered the $250 million in bail. The remaining collateral apparently came from an unnamed relative and a friend. What? Another scam right in front of our faces. How long before this guy flees to somewhere else? Charlie Gasparino is a senior correspondent with Fox Business. We followed this story from the beginning. He joins us tonight. Charlie, this seems like another kind of fraud perpetrated by a court.
It's a bizarre. Listen, I laugh. This isn't a funny story. If you're out the money that was stolen from your FTX crypto account and used to gamble away in their side hustle, which is was some sort of a hedge fund. Listen, this is so bizarre. They should really release the names of the people who put up their houses or whoever they are, because we should know, as you know, both Sam Bankman-Fried's mom and dad, Mrs. Fried, and Mr. Bankman have very close ties to major people in the Democratic Party. The mom was a huge Democratic Party fundraiser. I mean, for all I know, this is George Soros. I'm not saying it is George Soros, but if you came, if I found out tomorrow that George Soros put up part of this bond, by some house that he has, or someone like that, I would not be surprised, because that's in the wheelhouse of this very, lefty, politically connected with rich people family. So, I mean, they should really release who these people are, just so we get the full notice of how this guy is getting out of jail. Here's the other thing, Tucker. They don't need him as a witness. There is no reason why they have to be nice to this guy. And here's why. Carolyn Ellison, his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, was part of the whole mess of FTX and the side hustle hedge fund. She's turned evidence, and she said point blank in her charging documents that she cut a deal with the feds that I conspired with Sam Bankman-Fried, I'm paraphrasing, to basically not disclose what we were doing on the hedge fund and prevent that from being aired. That means he is toast. Stick a fork in him. Done. They don't need him. I mean, you usually cut these deals with these guys like Bernie Madoff. Remember, Madoff admitted to everything. He cut a deal with the feds to keep him out of jail. He gave him $10 million, which was nothing, but he was helping people find where those funds are. They don't need this guy to help them find the funds. Don't. It's done. First off, they're probably gone, just gambled away. So this is a big story. It's a weird side story to this whole thing. Why people are in power are still being nice to this guy. It is bizarre.
Tells you 1 million people defrauded by Sam Bankman-Fried.
Absolutely.
And we can't know
the next JP Morgan. The next those names were hysterical, by the way.
Carnegie Harriman, no prison inmate. Charlie Gasparino, great to see you.
You too, pal.
Now ask yourself, is that less wooden and more believable than the state propaganda produced by the Kim regime in North Korea? No, actually it's not. And doctors should be speaking out against that because it's corrosive of the public trust in medicine and it's just lying. But not many are, in fact, virtually none. Some of them are moving in the other direction. Ryan Marino, for example, is an emergency medicine physician in Ohio employed by university hospitals. He's often cited as an expert by outlets like NBC News. Recently, Marino, unbeknownst to those of us who are not on Twitter, has written several posts on that social media app attacking a woman who suffered a documented mRNA vax injury. He says she's, quote, looking for money. What? He has no evidence of that. This is a suffering patient. He's mocking her. Then he's also posted this image on Instagram, mocking the idea that a small amount of fentanyl can kill somebody. Mocking people who die of fentanyl? A doctor? Why is this allowed in this country? Why would any hospital still employ a so-called doctor like this? What exactly is going on? Alex Berenson broke this story. He's the author, of course, of Pandemia. His work is on Substack. He joins us tonight. Alex, thanks so much for coming on and for bringing this to light. So, you don't want to pile on one guy. He's just some doctor in Ohio, and you want to be fair and everything. But the guy is a doctor. Tell us why it's important for the rest of us to know about him.
Sure. So, by the way, it's actually even worse than what you said in that he's not attacking this lady because she had a vaccine injury. Her son, who's 15, had a documented case of myocarditis, and he's going at her and saying she wants money for that. So look, Dr. Marino, look, he's entitled to think that fentanyl should be legal and that all drugs should be legal, which he does. And he's entitled to be very pro-vaccine, which he is. But his views and the way he articulates them to me are part of a much larger problem on Twitter and with this group of very hard left doctors on Twitter who sometimes they're called med Twitter. And they will vociferously attack whether it's a journalist like me, whether it's somebody who says, hey, I have a family member who's vaccine injured, whether it's somebody who says, you know what, I don't think that, your harm reduction policies are working very well. They will use their credentials to try to shout down anybody who disagrees with them. And Dr. Marino is a particularly toxic example of this. He seems to have a particular problem with women, too. In the last month, he's attacked at least 3 women independently, using, he referred to one as a mommy blogger. It does not seem professional to me, and physicians do have to follow a code of conduct. And whether or not he's violating professional licensing rules, I think the cudgeling and the using of his authority this way is really problematic.
Alex Berenson, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So honestly, we've never been to a Tony Robbins seminar, and so when we trust it, you got to talk to Tony Robbins. That man is insightful, and that turned out to be true. And so on this New Year's, we thought we would ask Tony Robbins, who would know, what are 3 things that all of us can do in 2023 to improve ourselves deeply? Tony Robbins joins us now. Tony, thank you so much for doing this. I'm completely sold on your insight into the human condition. So what can all of us do to improve ourselves this year, do you think?
I think the first thing you have to do is develop a compelling future. I mean, after 3 years of COVID and people thinking if somebody breathes on you, you're going to die, and all the lies we're told. And then now you have young people today that are saying they don't want to have kids because, after all, that we're going to have in 12 years, the world's going to end, which, of course, is totally false. But when all these stories keep getting stacked and then you worry about inflation, people get overwhelmed. So we need a compelling future. A compelling future means anybody can deal with it incredibly difficult today if they have a real compelling tomorrow and a way to get there. Right. That's not affirmations. That's not positive thinking. That's not, setting New Year's resolutions that you break 2 weeks later. It means really coming up with a plan. In other words, for you to improve your life, there's lots of things we can't control. But if you focus on that, you're overwhelmed. There's plenty we can control in our minds and bodies. So for life to get better, we have to get better. For things to change, we have to change. And so my focus is showing people, let's start with your energy, for example. I'm doing this, a program I started in COVID. And when everybody's stuck at home, I said, how do I reach people and help them? What gets in their way? It's travel, it's time, it's money. So I put together this 5-day challenge, and I'm doing one more this year, January 24th to the 28th. And what I do is 2 hours a day at no charge. There's no money involved at all. And from your home or your office with your friends or family or by yourself, I walk you through the tools that'll make your 2023 effective. So we start with your energy. If you're exhausted and tired, you're not going to have a great relationship. You're not going to build a great business. You're heck not going to push through the difficult times. What are the emotions, as we were just alluding to in that clip, that'll change you? If you're having creativity and passion and decisiveness, that's very different than if you've gotten used to the emotions now of feeling overwhelmed and stressed and just, stressed out is the most one you see people are depressed. I don't know if you saw it today, but there was a new report out by the CDC that said 45% of high school students they interviewed said they were so depressed and so disappointed and down in 2021 they couldn't participate in normal activities. 1 in 5 said they considered suicide. 9% of those surveyed actually attempted suicide. That's how insane it has gotten. So we need a compelling future. We need to shift our emotions, create the shift in our bodies. Then what are we going to do about inflation? Well, Warren Buffett was asked about it the other day, and he said, here's what you do. Invest in yourself. No one can tax it. No one can take it away. If you get stronger and better, even if the dollar goes down and it shekels, if you're the best lawyer or doctor or podcaster or whatever, you're going to do well. And so we'll show people what to do in that area. What do you do to make sure you have a good time in your relationship? One of the things I love about you, Tucker, is talk about have a good time with the ones you love at the end of your show, usually, after you've put out all the things that we've got to deal with out there. But it's so true. That's the safe harbor for all of us. So what are you going to do in each of those areas? And at the end of 5 days, people now have a plan. They're not just excited about the future falsely or feeling overwhelmed or stressed by the future. They've really started to create a transformation.
That is absolutely right. You have to have a sight picture of where you're going, and once you can be excited about it. So wise. I'm not surprised, but I am grateful for that advice. Tony Robbins,
if people
want
to join us, they can go to Become Unshakable. If they want to join us, they can go to becomeunshakable.com. There's no charge. Register yourself, and then come join us for 5 days, a couple hours out of the day. We'll have over 1 million people from around the world there. So becomeunshakable.com.
Become Unshakable. Love it. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thanks for having us on. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Groh has spent his life reporting on work and, in fact, working. He saw that segment and reached out and said it's more important than ever to show the fact that a lot of Americans are doing real work. In fact, he's got a whole show about this called Dirty Jobs. It's been on the air for 20 years. He's also the host of How America Works on Fox Nation. He joins us tonight. Mike Groh, thanks so much for coming on. When we did that segment, I thought of you banging out the script the whole time. This is the opposite of the kind of actual work Mike Groh has dedicated his life to telling the rest of us about.
Yeah, you didn't tell me you were going to do that segment. Had I known, I would have insisted on following it up with something. So thank you for the chance to do that now.
Of course.
And let me just say, I can't speak really for anybody but me, but I would bet big that millions and millions of people jumped out of their chairs, screamed words we can't repeat on your program as a result of watching what you showed them. And look, again, it's not about being mean, but our relationship with work, our definition of what a good job is, that's something we can control. And you're so right. Portrayals of work shift with time. And I think part of the reason Dirty Jobs has been on the air for the last 20 years is we are the antidote to what you just showed America. We go to places where there's no meditation room. There's no 5-star breakfast to start the day. There's the bag house at the asphalt plant. They're just example after example after example. 350 jobs we've done so far. of people who are still doing things that look like work. So we can talk about a ton of different things, but fundamentally, our country still needs to be reminded of what, forgive me, I'm just going to say it, what real work looks like.
Well, it's just interesting that what you're calling real work is provably real because it's the work that if people stop doing, we would all pay for immediately. Like we would die in a lot of cases. There's no dispute. Like this is the actual indispensable work.
Look, and it makes us angry to be reminded of that because we don't like the idea that we're so reliant and so dependent on such a small and marginalized chunk of our workforce. Exactly. But it's the truth. Look, this episode's about good news, so let me give you some. MicroWorks, my foundation, evolved out of Dirty Jobs 15 years ago. With your help and a lot of appearances on your show over the last however many years, we've raised over $6 million in work ethic scholarships, and we've awarded that money to over 1,500 people who are now welding and steam fitting and pipe fitting and plumbing, and they're thriving, Tucker. Again and again and again, we see that it's still possible to achieve something that looks like prosperity if you begin by mastering a skill that's in demand. Shameless plug. Exactly. We're going to do it again next month. Work ethic scholarships at microworks.org. We're moving the needle in a modest way, but it starts by tapping the country on the shoulder, as you have done, and reminding them that real jobs still exist. 11 million of them are out there right now. The opportunities are everywhere. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
And they should have higher status. I mean, I love what you said about these are marginalized people. That's exactly right. These are the people, the guys who work at asphalt plants who make it possible for us to travel are marginalized. And that should not be the case. And thank you for everything you're doing to change that.
Thank you.
Great to see you. So what is the key to happiness? Since this is a segment, a show about happiness, we thought we'd get a little closer to that. We're about to speak to a man who was very unhappy as a young man and who is happy now and has learned a lot along the way. Our friend Johan Hari joins us after the break. Well, not to get too heavy or anything, but what is the key to happiness? Well, we thought we would ask someone who's learned that. Johan Hari was very unhappy as a young man. He's happy now. What did he learn that made the difference? Johan Hari is the author of a couple of fantastic books, including Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention, and How to Think Deeply Again. Johan Hari joins us now to explain the root of happiness. Johan, great to see you. Well, I love your story because you were so desperately unhappy, and now you have a lightness about you that suggests you're not. So what made the difference for you?
Well, I think there's lots of factors, but I would say to everyone listening, everyone watching, think about anything you've ever achieved that you're proud of in your life, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is that makes you feel good, that makes you happy. That thing that you're proud of required a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. You know, I had to really concentrate on it for a long period of time. And we are living in a huge crisis of focus and attention. When your ability to focus and pay attention breaks down, your ability to achieve your goals breaks down, your ability to solve your problems breaks down. It's happened to me, it's happened to so many people who are watching. You know, at the moment, the average American office worker focuses on any one task for only 3 minutes. For every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 6 years old, there's now 100 children who've been identified with that problem. So I think one of the key factors that's making us so unhappy is that we can't focus, we can't pay attention.
That's right.
So to get to the bottom of this, I ended up going on a really big journey all over the world. I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus. And what I learned from them is there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or can make it worse, and it's doing that to your kids. And loads of the factors that can make your attention worse have been hugely rising in recent years. You know, my book is called Stolen Focus because your focus didn't collapse. It's been stolen from you. But the good news, the reason why this is an item for the Happy Show, is that once we understand what those causes are, we can begin to get our attention back for us and our kids.
You can't be happy unless you're grounded. And being grounded means being focused, being able to take something in and fully experience it. So I think you're absolutely right.
That's a really good way of putting it. And, it makes me think about, I went to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you've got to understand about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. It's a fundamental limitation of the human brain. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion. The average teenager believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller get people into labs and they study them and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time. And what they discover is always the same. You can't do more than one thing at a time. What you do is you juggle very quickly between tasks. You're like, wait, what did Tucker just ask me? What is this message on WhatsApp? What does it say on the TV? Wait, Tucker, what did you just ask me? And it turns out that juggling, which we're all doing all the time, is coming with a really big cost. It's called the switch cost effect. It's having a profound effect on our attention and focus, but there's loads of things we can do to get it back. I'll give you an example of one. This is a K-Safe. Anyone can order it. You put your phone in it, push the button, it locks your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. I go through dozens of things like that we can do to get our attention back in my book, Stolen Focus. We don't have to live like this. We can get our attention back if we want to.
Also, if you live near a large body of water, you could just toss it in there.
100%. Yeah.
All right, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Great to see you, Tucker. Cheers.
Our friend Harris Faulkner is out with a new book on a topic that transcends politics. In fact, it transcends everything else. It's a book about prayer. The book is called Faith Still Moves Mountains, Miraculous Stories of the Healing Power of Prayer. Now, the country's getting more secular, so you have to ask, how is it doing? Well, it's killing it. This book just topped the New York Times bestseller list, so we wanted to talk to Harris Faulkner about it. She is, of course, the host of the Faulkner Focus on Fox. She's also co-host of Outnumbered. Harris Faulkner joins us now. Harris, thank you so much for coming on tonight. The book title suggests that prayer is real. It actually works. Yes. It's not just something you do to seem pious. It has actual effects. Is that the argument you're making?
It is, and I make it with evidence because the divine assignment on my life, Tucker, is something that I want everybody to find for their own lives. I don't prophesize. I'm obviously not a pastor. I'm a journalist. My divine assignment is to be a witness. And so through Faith Still Moves Mountains, I tell stories of other people's miracles in their lives from some of the news stories that I've covered. Lee County, Alabama, twister outbreak. 80-some-year-old woman, Ernestine, survives the unthinkable inside of her prayer closet. All of the homes on her street razed to the ground to their foundations, but the tethered, wind-blown, wet, paint-stripped, tornado-driven prayer closet survives. And the EMTs show up, and there she is praying mightily, Lord, it is your will for me to go on with the life you've blessed me with. Lord, I'm so grateful. I'm here, and thank you for letting me survive. She prayed before, during, and after the storm. There are so many stories like this. And Tucker, you know from interviewing people all over the country, people always share with you the bad news, but wouldn't it be amazing if they could share the good news? And that's what this is about, but news that we can use, because we all need to connect with something greater than ourselves to lift us up. We are a country that's falling away with its faith. Gallup is studying this, Pew Research is studying this. By 2070, it appears will be fewer than 50% majority Christian Judeo in this country. We're changing. And look at what's happening around us. People don't seem happier for it. They don't seem more hopeful for it. So Faith Still Moves Mountains is based on what the Bible tells us about mustard seed faith, that faith that you have when it looks like everything is being torn apart, or even when things are great. Pray all the time. You know, people are ready to make their New Year's resolutions. I love that what you're doing is on, the second day of the year. We're going to grip hold. People are I'm going to eat fewer donuts and work out more at the gym. Why don't you make a permanent change in your life? And God does not care what season you are in. He'll meet you right where you are. And when you lean into the Lord, He leans into you. And whatever your struggle is, your addiction, your depression, whatever it is, you can begin to really work through it without saying, well, by February 15th, if it's not fixed, I give up. Because isn't that what we usually do with our resolutions? This is a resolute promise from the Lord to go forth with a better destiny than ever before.
Well, how are you, living in the world that we both live in, so forthright and unembarrassed to talk like this? I love it. But how do you do that?
I am unapologetic, and I was raised by a warrior. My dad was a combat pilot. And he and my mother had seen some pretty tough times. 2 wars, it wasn't clear if Dad was coming home. I really do believe that warrior spirit and that forever prayer-filled mom's belief got so deeply into me that as I grew up and connected with that, it started to make me feel like I should tell the truth when people ask me, how do you get through tough times? How do you tell stories like, disasters? Because, if you see me, a news anchor, something bad is probably happening if I'm on scene. So as a cub reporter on through now at the network, I pray. I always have. We know unthinkable, TMI, too much stuff about some of our colleagues through years and years of being in the business. Why can't I share the foundational way that I get through things? Why can't I tell people that I love the Lord? And by the way, why can't we be bold with our faith? You can't cancel us. This is the time of the year, and everybody knows we're just gotten through Christmas, entering this new year. Satan is skipping through the tulips right now. The Satanic Temple of Illinois, just a few days ago, put its display. Well, the city let it. Right next to the menorah, the Christmas tree, the cross, and then they came out and they did well, look, it's a free country, you can do that. You don't get to cancel us, though. Don't move the Christmas tree, the cross, and the menorah. You don't get to do that. But if you wanted to worship something that is not going to edify you and lift you up, well, heck, don't blame the rest of us if we're going to be bold. So now I'm getting invited to mega churches, which is so not the thing I ever thought I would be doing as a journalist. But we go and we talk about being bold and our faith. This is the time to have an impenetrable weapon, a power of spirituality in our hearts and at our fingertips. It's called prayer. Be bold with God, and it is amazing what can happen in your life. And don't keep it a secret. Don't hide your light. Shine brightly.
Amazing. Boy, am I glad we had this conversation. Harris Faulkner, bless you, and thank you for saying what you said.
Aw, thank you, my friend Tucker.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Happy first Tuesday in 2023. The fun never stops. We thought we'd be able to announce a new Speaker of the House tonight. We thought we knew who it was going to be. But no, the race for Speaker is still ongoing. Voting's been suspended for the day. It's going to resume again tomorrow. Now, the fact that this race has not been settled by now is being described, especially online, by many as embarrassing. And it is embarrassing if you prefer the Soviet-style consensus of the Democratic Party's internal elections, where votes are merely a formality and all the really big decisions, the meaningful ones, are made years in advance by donors. Oh, of course, everyone's on board. That's what they do. But if you prefer democracy to oligarchy, if you prefer real debates about issues that actually matter, it's pretty refreshing to see it. Yes, it's a little chaotic, but this is what it's supposed to be. Now, we're going to bring you a lot more detail on what's happening in just a minute and throughout the week. But first, a quick overview to frame the big points. So Kevin McCarthy of California was going to be Speaker. He badly wants to be Speaker. In fact, he wants that job more than anything else in his life. And he was going to get it, but then a group of 20 Republican members stopped him. Now, they stopped him because they decided that Kevin McCarthy is not conservative enough to represent a party that's just taken back the House from Nancy Pelosi. And they are definitely right about that. McCarthy is not especially conservative. He's, in fact, ideologically agnostic. He's flexible. His real constituency is the lobbying community in Washington. So if you've got sincere political beliefs, that is infuriating to watch. On the other hand, to be fair, this is politics, and McCarthy does have strengths. It's not easy being Speaker when the House is this closely divided. And in some ways, Kevin McCarthy is perfectly suited for that. He is skilled in politics, not a small thing. And critically, McCarthy is willing to spend the next 2 years living in hotel rooms raising money for his party ahead of a historic presidential election. What other Republican in the House is willing to do that? Well, as of tonight, and we have checked, no one has stepped forward. So really the pivotal question is, how badly does Kevin McCarthy want this job? 20 of his colleagues have just publicly disavowed him, loudly and again and again. So to win them back, McCarthy is going to have to give them something real. Not more airy promises, which he specializes in. He's going to have to give them actual concessions. If Kevin McCarthy wants to be the Speaker, he is going to have to do things he would never do otherwise. Like what? We can think of at least two things. First, release the January 6th files. not some of the January 6th files and video, all of it. And not to some phony committee that will hide them, that in fact is designed to hide them from the public, but put them online, release them to the public directly, so that the rest of us can finally know what actually happened on January 6th, 2021. It's been 2 years. It's long overdue. It's our right as Americans to know. And McCarthy could tell us. Second, Kevin McCarthy could put Thomas Massie of Kentucky in charge of a new Frank Church committee designed to discover what the FBI and the intel agencies have been doing to control domestic politics in this country. They've been doing a lot. But no one in Washington wants to talk about it. This topic is effectively off limits, and has been. In fact, no one's talked about it for almost 50 years. And so because no one has talked about it or stopped it, the rot has spread, and democracy has withered. You can feel it. The FBI is now a bigger force in American elections than any single group of voters. This cannot continue. It is poison, and Kevin McCarthy is uniquely situated right now to stop it. So by striking a deal with his 20 colleagues, McCarthy could restore our system to health and at the very same time get the job he has always wanted. It's not so complicated. Let's hope he does it. As we said, more on that story in just a minute. This is a Fox News alert. Lots of drama on Capitol Hill tonight. There is still no Speaker of the House. There are a couple of votes. Kevin McCarthy has been turned down twice by a total of 20 Republicans. Fox's Trace Gallagher has been following this all day long and has an update for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, after 3 rounds of voting, Kevin McCarthy is actually losing ground. During rounds 1 and 2, 19 hardline conservatives voted against him. But in round 3, Florida GOP Congressman-elect Byron Donalds also voted against McCarthy. All 20 of those GOP opposition votes went to Ohio Congressman-elect Jim Jordan, who says he does not want to be Speaker of the House. Meantime, those voting against Kevin McCarthy are pushing for concessions like specific committee assignments and increased funding to investigate government corruption. But Congressman-elect Mike Waltz says those voting against McCarthy keep changing their demands. Watch him.
At this point, it seems to just be pure obstructionism, and what's so frustrating is the goalpost seems to keep moving. We all asked this morning as a conference, some of those individuals, what will it take to get to 218 so we can move forward with the agenda that the voters elected us to move forward with and stop Biden's agenda? And there was no answer.
Meantime, Kevin McCarthy says he is in it for the long haul, and by the way, the record long haul happened back in 1856 when it took 133 ballots over 2 months to elect a Speaker of the House. And remember, until there's a Speaker, the House cannot do any business. In fact, new members can't even be sworn in. Political analysts say as the ballots go on, some members may start voting present, and each no-show or present vote would lower Kevin McCarthy's threshold. Right now, as you heard, he needs 218 votes. Tucker, he is 16 short going into tomorrow.
Wow. Democracy in action. Trace Gallagher, thank you for that. I had no idea that went on for months. Appreciate it. You can watch Trace every weeknight at midnight at Fox News at night. So here's an interesting story that you may have missed. Early this year, a lawyer called Kevin Evans issued a records request to the Department of Justice. He wanted DOJ to turn over any evidence it had about the Biden family's overseas influence peddling operation. So the DOJ did not comply, and Evans then sued. Government lawyers then said in court they had 400 pages of, quote, potentially relevant documents. But now Evans says DOJ is trying to hide those documents on behalf of the Biden family it serves. Josh Boswell breaks a lot of stories over at the Mail Online, where he's a senior reporter. He broke this one. He joins us tonight. Hey, Josh.
Hi.
So who is this lawyer, and are we certain that these 400 pages exist?
Yeah, so this is a Colorado lawyer who actually is quite an expert in the Freedom of Information Act, which is what he used to file this request to ask for any documents that the Justice Department holds about Hunter and about Jim Biden, the president's brother, and their dealings with Russia, China, Ukraine. The Justice Department themselves, the lawyers admitted in court, according to Evans, that there were 400 pages at least of responsive documents. But now they're backtracking, as you say, and they're claiming that they can no longer confirm or deny that these documents exist. It seems like a bit of an about face, and it doesn't really make much sense. Clearly, there are some documents there, and clearly this is something important that I think the American people should be able to see.
Now, you're not from this country, I realize, but it's your understanding that under the American legal code, the Department of Justice is not allowed to cover up crimes of the president's family, right? That's not legal.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what was happening, then that would be pretty much against the rules. I think we can all agree on that. It's just, this is something that we need to know about. There are millions of dollars that have gone from a Chinese company to Hunter Biden. We know that much from his laptop and from other investigations. And we should be seeing every piece of evidence we can find on this, because this all relates back to the President of the United States. This is incredibly important.
It's totally right. And if it hadn't been for all the crack and the porn and all that stuff, this laptop, I think, would not be dismissed by people as irrelevant. It is relevant, as you well know. Josh Boswell of Mail Online, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to pivot next to a story from Waffle House, a story that was caught on video where a Waffle House employee valiantly fought off a gaggle of drunk customers late night. She's become famous online. We tracked her down, and we are honored to be joined by her next. You may have noticed there's a whole industry of smear merchants for hire in this country, people who take money from often powerful corporations to defame other people in the name of civil rights. Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League does this for a living, a very good living. The NAACP does it as well. Now, we're not just imagining this. We're about to talk to someone who's seen it firsthand, Callie Means. Early in his career, Callie Means consulted for the Coca-Cola Company. His job was to ensure that sugar taxes failed and that soda was included in food stamp funding so poor people could have all the soda they needed and you could pay for it. Callie Means says that Coca-Cola paid the NAACP and other civil rights groups to brand opponents of that plan as racist. Oh, you're a racist. Okay, now. So that's how it works. Callie Means is the co-founder of True Medicine and a whistleblower. He joins us tonight. Callie Means, thank you so much for coming on. So you're basically confirming the most cynical assumption of observers, which is that this is all a pay-for-play deal, that big corporations use these groups, people like Greenblatt at ADL and the NAACP, to hurt their business opponents. That's what you saw?
Tucker, being inside of the room, there are three parts to the playbook to basically rig the system that Coke and many other special interests use. The first, as you alluded to, is the civil rights group, and in the case of the food stamps and Coke issue, it was the NAACP. And what was shocking is that being inside of the room, it's transactional. They say the quiet part out loud. Coke will give, in this case, the NAACP, millions of dollars for the NAACP to call opponents, in this case, parents who are concerned about their kids ingesting 100 times more sugar than they did 100 years ago, to call them racist and to shut down debate. The second part of the stool, and this is very bipartisan, it's the Heritage Foundation and other conservative think tanks, and I have a lot of experience with the Heritage Foundation, and let me tell you, ordering a corporate slanted study from the Heritage Foundation is about as easy and transactional as going into McDonald's and getting a Big Mac. And the third, and maybe even the most important one, is research institutions. I think it's important to note that Coke and processed food companies spend 11 times more on nutrition research than the NIH. And being in the rooms, I can tell you, that is not out of philanthropic goodwill. They're expecting something in return. And what they're getting is peer-reviewed studies from elite research institutions saying things like sugar doesn't cause obesity. And the loser here is kids.
Well, of course, and all of us. The depth of the corruption is awe-inspiring. This deserves a much longer conversation than we have time for now. I'm just interested. A lot of people have seen what you're describing. You're almost alone in talking about it in public. Why are you saying this? I mean, thank you, but why?
Honestly, yeah, thank you, Tucker. I'm going to be honest. I'm thinking about my new son, Rourke, and the world he's going into. He's going into a world where 25% of young adults have prediabetes, which used to be called adult onset diabetes, where 50% of adults have prediabetes or diabetes, where male sperm count is plummeting 50%, where we are getting sicker, fatter, more infertile, more depressed at an exponential rate. It's because of food. It's because of a rigged system. It's because of these tactics, and it's an issue that the left and the right need to get behind. We are destroying our precious human capital in this country because of nutrition and because of the nutrition, food, healthcare access that it's incentivized for us to be sick and addicted for longer periods of time. That's how they make money.
Yeah, and the lying, and that degrades all. To cite the Edmund Pettus Bridge or some fake peer-reviewed study in order to justify this is really infuriating. I appreciate your coming forward. Callie Means, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, here's the latest summarized. Kevin McCarthy badly wants to be the next Speaker of the House, but as of tonight, he is not going to be. He doesn't have the votes. It's not a question of who's good or who's bad, who's well-intentioned, who's not. It's a question of simple electoral math, something that Kevin McCarthy is highly familiar with since he does this for a living. At this point, as of right now, facing that mathematical reality, Kevin McCarthy has two choices. He can either step aside and let somebody else do the job, acknowledging in the process that he is not the only person in Congress capable of being Speaker, or he can try and win over the people who oppose him, as you traditionally do in elections. Or you've got reservations about Kevin McCarthy? You don't want to be ruled by a man who wears a Ukrainian flag lapel pin and lives with Frank Luntz? No problem. We get it. Let us tell you how he's better than you think he is. Let us try and change your mind. Let us try to convince you. In a normal race, that's what you would do. But that is not what Kevin McCarthy's team is doing. Instead, like the left they purport to oppose, they are using threats and fear to force people to support the candidate. Anyone who opposes Kevin McCarthy, one of his surrogates explained today, is, quote, an enemy, a, quote, terrorist. That's their message. In a moment, we'll tell you how that message is working. But first tonight, in the summer of 2016, the government transparency organization WikiLeaks released thousands of emails from the servers of the Democratic National Committee. Those documents showed conclusively that Hillary Clinton partisans had worked to rig the Democratic primary against her rival, Bernie Sanders. It was obvious from the start that that email dump had come from an internal source, probably from a DNC staffer who was offended by the corruption of the Clinton team. But of course, the Democratic Party couldn't admit that, too embarrassing, too revealing. So instead, in order to cover this wrongdoing, the Clinton campaign claimed that Russia did it. The Russians hacked the servers, remember that? Now, you may have believed it or not, but intel agencies in this country must have known at the time that it was not true. They would know. But they said nothing. And they said nothing because blaming Russia turned out to be a very useful political tool. In fact, before long, it became the default response to every perceived disaster in Washington. Hillary lost. Why Russia? Donald Trump can't be president. Why Russia? Hunter Biden's laptop is here. Russian. Audit aid to Ukraine? Can't. Russia. And so on and so on. So over time, probably inevitably, the inflated threat of Russia became a pretext for everything bad, including censorship in this country. It's Russian disinformation. Shut it down. Thanks to new reporting from Matt Taibbi, who has spent weeks sifting through previously secret Twitter files, we know the federal government's intelligence and law enforcement agencies enthusiastically joined the effort to censor the political speech of American citizens illegally. It was a sophisticated effort. At one point, for example, the State Department released a report falsely claiming that thousands of Twitter accounts were controlled by foreign governments. Russia! And then unnamed sources in the intel world leaked scary headlines about Russian disinformation running rampant on Twitter. Twitter deleted data potentially crucial to the Russia probes, screamed Politico, ever obedient to the intel agencies. And then the Washington Post published a piece threatening to increase regulation of Twitter's advertising because, of course, Russia. So it was a manufactured panic about Russia. But on the basis of that manufactured panic, lawmakers in Washington demanded more censorship.
The issue is not that the companies before us today are taking too many posts down. The issue is that they're leaving too many dangerous posts up. In fact, they're amplifying harmful content so that it spreads like wildfire and torches our democracy.
Oh, too much speaking. Your opinions are a threat to our, quote, democracy. That would be sitting United States Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. But almost nobody said anything because Russia. And so it accelerated. Not long after that tape was shot, in November of 2020, Congressman Adam Schiff of California, who was then the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, demanded that Twitter censor any discussion about the House Intelligence Committee. Quote, suppress any and all search results about committee staff, a Schiff aide demanded of Twitter. Schiff was particularly furious that a journalist called Paul Sperry had reported on Schiff's connection to the CIA whistleblower behind Donald Trump's impeachment. So Schiff demanded that Twitter censor Sperry. Quote, suspend the many accounts, including Paul Sperry, commanded Schiff's office. This is illegal. It's openly unconstitutional. Government officials cannot suppress speech. That's the Bill of Rights. And even at Twitter, executives seem to understand that. No, this isn't feasible. We don't do this, replied one Twitter executive. But ultimately, however, they caved. In time, in fact, Paul Sperry was censored by Twitter, along with many thousands of others. Twitter had effectively become a government propaganda outlet. How that happened and the effect that it had on American electoral politics is one of the most important stories of our time. And as we said, we know about it because of Matt Taibbi, who has been at the center of it. He joins us tonight. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. So I would just offer to our audience your extensive reporting on this, which is on Twitter and on your Substack. But to summarize, having looked at these documents for weeks now, how deep was the penetration of Twitter by U.S. law enforcement and intel agencies?
I think we can say pretty conclusively after looking at tens of thousands of emails over the course of these weeks that the government was in the censorship business in a huge way. That's, I think, provable now. And not just one agency, really every conceivable wing of the enforcement agencies of the U.S. government were in some way or another sending moderation requests to Twitter, and in many cases those requests were being fulfilled, and they were coming from everywhere, from every place from the NSA to the HHS to FBI, DHS, and even what they call other government agencies, which I think is code for the CIA. So we have reports from all over, from states, from police departments, everywhere.
So that's prima facie illegal. It's unconstitutional. Government cannot censor political speech. It could not be clearer. Our assumption is that this was made possible because of hysteria about Russian penetration of our politics. Is that your read of it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the thread that I put out yesterday traces the history of what happened, particularly in the fall of 2017. Twitter somewhat naively thought that they would not be sucked into the Russiagate phenomenon. They really thought this was going to be Facebook's problem alone. But when it started to become politically very difficult for them, and people like the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, the senator of Virginia, put pressure on them. There's an email that talked about how he was pressuring them to, quote, keep producing material for them. Ultimately, Twitter ended up caving, and by the end of the year, they had an internal guidance, which I think is very significant, where they said publicly, we will only remove content at our sole discretion. Privately, we will remove content, any content that's identified by the United States intelligence community as a foreign state actor conducting cyber operations. So if the intel community says we take it down, we're going to take it down.
And of course, a lot of the people who were censored were not foreign state actors. In at least one case that you documented, this was a journalist. And I have to ask, there are a lot of different nonprofit organizations that purport to defend free speech on behalf of journalists. I won't even bother to name them, but there are a lot of them. Have any of them weighed in on this and raised holy hell?
No, and that's been a profound disappointment. For me personally, I gave to the ACLU for years. I'm one of those sort of dyed-in-the-wool liberals and grew up that way. I'm deeply disappointed. I think a lot of people who are sort of politically on that side of the aisle are missing the boat on this. They don't understand the gravity of the situation. They're thinking about this in partisan terms. It's not a partisan story. This is a story about the architecture of the intelligence community and law enforcement getting its hands on speech and on the ability of people to communicate with one another through platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And they're doing this in a very profound way, much more serious than I thought it was at the beginning of this story.
And in relative terms, Twitter is a smaller player. I mean, you have Facebook and Google that dwarf it in size. I mean, we've got to assume that those two companies are as penetrated as Twitter has been, don't we?
Yes, and there's evidence for that. Certainly, we've seen that they had what they called weekly or monthly industry meetings with the DHS and the FBI. And those included a number of companies, including Facebook, in some cases Wikipedia, Pinterest. There were a whole series of companies that were included in these communications. How deep the penetration goes in those other companies, I can't say, but I do know that they had very close communications. And in Twitter's case, the number of requests that came in was really overwhelming. Your previous guest, Michael Schellenberger, talked about how they were paid $3 million by the FBI. They were underpaid. They were doing so much work for the government in terms of reviewing these documents that they should have been compensated a lot more for their work.
How can it be a free society or a democracy if law enforcement and intel agencies are determining what we can say?
Well, people are hiding behind the fig leaf of, well, they didn't formally ask, they didn't demand that you do it, but how much of an ask is it really? How voluntary is it really when the FBI or the NSA or the CIA or the DHS comes to your company and presents you with an Excel spreadsheet of thousands of names and says, we assess that these accounts are linked to the Internet Research Agency and they're foreign threat actors? I think these companies feel enormous pressure to do the moderation, and the initial work that we've done proves that they did so.
Yeah. This is one. There are many problems that beset American society. This is a simple one to fix. Just ban it. Government agencies are not allowed to censor speech in the United States. I think it's a pretty easy thing to remedy. And we wouldn't know about it were it not for your efforts. Thank you, Matt Taibbi.
Thanks so much, Tucker.
A lot of drama in Washington, as we alluded at the outset. The House of Representatives has just reconvened 11 minutes ago to try once again to elect a new Speaker of the House. We are monitoring that. Meanwhile, and it pains us to say this, but it is true, surrogates for Kevin McCarthy are saying out loud, if you don't support Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, you're a terrorist. We have that tape. Plus, the Canadian shop teacher with the gigantic prosthetic breasts working out his fetish in front of the kids. We have an update on that story. Of course we do. We'll be right back. Of your brain, that creepy shop teacher in Canada who decided to sexualize the kids in his shop class, getting them involved in his weird fetish life. The guy uses the name Kayla Lemieux and then shows up to class at Oakville Trafalgar School wearing gigantic prosthetic breasts, apparently emulating a style of Japanese pornography called exploding milk porn. Not making this up. Wish we were. The Halton District School Board and the Oakville Trafalgar School have defended this guy. Now, finally, some parents are considering legal action. Rishi Bandhu is with the Bandhu law firm. He's also a parent of a ninth grader, at Oakville, who joins us to explain. We sure appreciate your coming on tonight, and thank you for having the bravery to make your position public. What is your position about this shop teacher?
Well, thanks for having me, Tucker. We really appreciate your interest in this. Well, what we've done is we've asked the board essentially to do three things. Number one is we've asked them to apply the student dress code to the teachers because one doesn't exist for the teachers. And in our view, it's just illogical and absurd to suggest that the teachers would be held to a lower standard than the students in terms of their attire. Secondly, once we've established what that standard is, if the school board is creating exceptions from that standard, we want to know specifically what those exceptions are. Yes. And then thirdly, we would like the school board to cease and desist from interfering with the right of the parents to discuss this matter. And they've repeatedly done that in school council meetings since the beginning of the year.
What this reveals is their priorities, and they seem much more concerned with protecting and affirming this guy's personal sexual journey than they are with your kids. And it's a school. Shouldn't they be primarily concerned with the kids who go to the school?
Well, I do agree with that. And look, this is an issue about gender identity and expression, and human rights by their nature are complex, but gender identity and expression are relatively new grounds that have been introduced into the Ontario's code in 2012. So we don't have a lot of jurisprudence or yes. direction from that from our tribunal or the courts. And so I think what the board is doing is they've taken an overly risk-averse approach to this issue. And look, I can understand and appreciate that. They have a diversity and inclusion mandate, and as a racialized person with racialized children in those schools, I commend that approach, and I appreciate that. However, what they're missing is that when it comes to human rights and particularly gender identity and expression, context is important, and there's a very delicate balancing of interests that have to happen here. And I don't think that they've done that appropriately. And as you've pointed out, Tucker, I think the context that they're missing here is that this is a school, and these are children and they're adolescents, and their maturity is still developing. Now, on the other hand, I think there's some extreme views taken of this as well, which say that transgendered individuals don't have any rights under the law. And the problem is that that's an extreme view, and the parents that I represent and the parents that support them are being labeled as discriminatory or bigoted. Yeah. And that's the problem. It polarizes us, and what we need is a constructive approach, some constructive dialogue, and some common sense on this issue.
Well, you're not going to get constructive dialogue if no dialogue is allowed, if parents aren't allowed to talk. So I hope at the very least you win that battle and get freedom of speech back. I think that's a prerequisite. Rishi Bandhu, I appreciate your coming on.
I'm hopeful that we will.
Amen.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Times about the energy crisis that is really moving Europe back several notches economically. It's becoming poor. It's the result mostly of the war in Ukraine, but not exclusively. Well, that's happening here too. In case you haven't noticed, in case you haven't checked recently, electricity prices in this country, in many places, are completely out of control. And that's not just your perception, it's real. Here are the numbers. From November 2021 to November 2022, the price of electricity has gone up more than 46% in the city of Boston, for example. In Hawaii, it's up more than 36%. Miami, 35% over a year. In 1 year. Baltimore, 24%. Now keep in mind, these are average prices, but they fluctuate depending on the weather. During severe weather, prices have gone up by more than 6,000% in some parts of the country. According to Bloomberg, for example, electricity prices in Houston, Texas, one of the biggest cities in the country, in a state that's totally energy independent. In Houston, prices went up 65-fold just a few days before Christmas. There was a winter storm. Now, why is this happening? Really simple. Renewable energy, and the people making billions off it who are donating to Democrats. So you wouldn't think the Biden administration would be interested in fixing it. Oh, no, they're not. They want to make it worse because their donors want to make it worse. Here's Kamala Harris.
As the days go by, you will see it in a new coast-to-coast network of electric vehicle charging stations, or a new wind turbine or cutting-edge solar panel that will cut energy costs and protect our planet, or a new water heater in your home that lowers both your electric bill and pollution. The bottom line is this: President Joe Biden and I are making this better, brighter future real.
Now, what you shouldn't do is let a group of know-nothings sweep into power in a very suspect election and turn the country you grew up in into a third world hellhole. But that's actually where we're headed. And that's not an overstatement. Look at the numbers. If you're worried about electricity prices in the United States of America, which has the largest recoverable oil reserves in the world, it's not an accident, it's on purpose. Mark Morano is the publisher of Climate Depot, the author of Green Fraud, which it is. He joins us tonight. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. So a couple of questions. Why are there not front page stories everywhere about increases in electricity prices of 25, 35, 40, 50% in a year? Why is no one saying anything about this?
Well, because this is all part of the agenda, and the media is in on this agenda. These are the intended consequences of these policies. Now, the media will report on it. Associated Press had an article about the heating fuels being up more than 50% year over year last year. So they've actually covered it, but they don't cover it in a way that's the same meaning as, say, this was allegedly caused by, say, the free market system was causing this shortage. Instead, they just gloss over the pain that real Americans are feeling. And this is disproportionately impacting people on fixed income, lower income people. A higher percentage of their money goes to pay for this higher energy. And of course, you think the media would be all over that, but they're not, because they're in on what Kamala Harris described. And it's essentially this green utopian vision that has not been achieved anywhere in the world. We saw Sri Lanka try it. We saw Europe trying it. And of course, they're doing their best now as coal use is now hitting a global high to reverse their trends for the last 15 years to their hellish version of the Green New Deal. But the U.S., we have it baked in our system, and we're heading down the same road Europe has done for the last decade.
Well, so that's kind of the point. It's utopianism without the utopia. We keep hearing these claims that renewables are better than what we currently have. You follow this for a living, you write about it, you study it for a living. Can you think of any place on planet Earth where so-called renewable, so-called green energy has made energy more reliable and cheaper?
There's no, that's a utopian, and that's what they do. They replace the existing reality that just worked. Remember, the United States has had electrical grids since over 100 years, over a century. We know how to provide power. There is no excuse to have energy shortages, blackouts, and high skyrocketing prices. The only excuse is politics, and a net zero, Green New Deal, climate agenda has crept in to our policies. You have solar and wind being subsidized. There's no penalty for the unreliability, the lack of battery storage, the lack of energy they produce. They're treated equally, which then forces grids to have incorporate with solar and wind mandates them into the grid, and then you end up with either shortages and consequential skyrocketing prices. We ought to start naming energy policies after the politicians. Energy blackouts is what we ought to do. Name the policies, name the blackouts after politicians who push these policies.
Well, that's totally true, but they've silenced opposition with their signature moral aggression, where people are embarrassed of fossil fuels. What? You're embarrassed of civilization? It's infuriating. Mark Morano, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So every major government agency, at your expense, publishes hundreds of pages of guidelines that promote absurd anti-white woke propaganda. The Wall Street Journal just obtained documents from NASA which warn of something called micro inequities. They also learned the Department of Veterans Affairs has a, quote, gender gingerbread person. It's also depressing if you think about it. It's one thing if it's happening at the Small Business Association, but if it's happening at the Pentagon, it's a huge problem, and it is. The Army now advises soldiers not to have any, quote, discomfort showering with a female who has male genitalia. Really? So some dude's going to get in the shower with you pretending to be a girl, and if you don't like it, you're the weirdo. So a lot of soldiers are just leaving over all of this. Ivan Raiklin is one of them. He served 25 years as both lieutenant colonel and a Green Beret. But the moment the Pentagon started promoting vax mandates and equity training, he left. He retired. Now, we asked him about that decision, a very sad decision from his point of view, in a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson today. Here's part of the conversation.
We've gone away from the focus of fighting and winning our nation's wars and defending the Constitution. If we get back to that, I think we'll be in a better position to start to repel from foreign adversaries, which I kind of pivoted and talked about. Namely, obviously the biggest one is China. Also, Russia is helping and advise, I would argue, to make sure it expedites our demise. Iran is probably right there, not in a close third, but in third place.
Do you know the answer? You raised a really interesting point when you said if you're going to remind the entire military force what its job is, which is to defend the Constitution. And that's,
you have to know the Constitution.
Thank you.
So if I ask the question of Secretary Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Milley, if I ask you, General, what are you going to do when the 25th Amendment's violated? Oh, you don't know what the 25th Amendment is? How about, what are you going to do when the 12th Amendment's violated? Oh, you don't know that one? Let me go to the base document. What about Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2? Or Article 1, Section 4? Most of these people are going to look at you like deer in the headlights. I have no clue what you're talking about. The thing is that our entire institutions have been, through the media, have pushed this, whether it's all three branches of federal government, even at the state level, have been pushing this narrative to make people think that this is actually the extremism thing is a thing, and it only applies to one side of the political ideology. And so, in a sense, some folks are convinced that that's true, even though it's not. It's not based on fact. others know that critical thinkers, I would say majority of my network is in the special ops and intel community. And those that are even lean left of center, when I present the evidence in a very deliberate, systematic manner, they know where I stand ideologically, they'll agree with the conclusion, which does not align with what's being promulgated at the top. But they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose their benefits. It all comes down to that. It all comes down to safety, security, and they're willing to bend and budge on their moral, ethical, and even legal principles.
So we've spent a couple of segments tonight telling you how dysfunctional Congress is, and one of the things you learn when you look closely is there are a lot of buffoons serving there. We just had Dan Crenshaw tape, so you know that for a fact. But if you're feeling down on Congress, well, everything is relative. Have you seen the president recently? Here he was today promoting his infrastructure agenda with Mitch McConnell in Kentucky.
I've traveled over 140 countries around the world. As I'll paraphrase the phrase in my own neighborhood. The rest of the countries, the world's not a patch on our genes. If we do what we want to do, we need to do.
Yeah, right. What? President. So Canadians, when you'd run into them, would always brag about their healthcare system. It was free. They don't say that anymore because it's not working. A new poll shows that nearly half of people in Canada think their local hospital is, quote, overwhelmed. So that's a huge problem. That's a basic government service in Canada. But rather than fix it, the Trudeau government has decided, hey, there's an easier way. Let's just kill people. So they're subsidizing the killing of their own population through euthanasia, but it's state euthanasia. It's the state killing people, inconvenient people, poor people, disabled people. The most recent case involves a retired Canadian Army colonel called Christine Gauthier. Gauthier is a paraplegic. She competed in the 2016 Rio de Janeiro Paralympics. Recently, Gauthier talked to a Veterans Affairs officer in Canada about getting a wheelchair lift in her home because she needs it. The response from the VA officer? You should take advantage of our government-funded euthanasia. You should die. Christine Gauthier joins us tonight. It's a shocking story, and I appreciate your coming on to tell it. Thank you. Did we simplify unfairly your experience with the Canadian government?
Well, Tucker, I'd like to be able to make things clear. This was a conversation with a person, okay, that told me that. It was even at the translation at the committee, it was wrongly transmitted right there. So I understand how things can escalate, and from going word to, it can change. So I will again say exactly what happened. I was asked to go and speak in front of the Veterans Affairs Permanent Committee on another subject about a $570 million new contract that Trudeau has just issued to, apparently now we know, was Loblaw's owner. So our veteran services is now private property from Loblaw, if we simplify things. At that committee, somebody has brought upon the MAID, or medical assistance to die, from other veterans. And one of the person, the deputy, has spoken about this being just an isolated case, and that it was unknown of others. But I had to raise my hand and said, I'm sorry, but this had happened to me as well. So as I have called the Veterans Affairs Services one day to say how I could not go on anymore, things were so hard. It's been 5 years to this date that I'm waiting for an elevator, a renewal of equipment, may I say. 5 years that I have to worm on the floor like a worm to go up and down to access my house. And this person told me, you know, Ms. Gauthier, if you're really that fed up and you're really that tired and you really can't go on anymore, you know you have the right to die. So how was that brought up? There was no guideline or offered methods or doctors to do it. When this guy told me that, I said, this is really ridiculous. I can't believe that you will not give me the equipment I need to live, but you will help me to die. And that's when and how the conversation ended. I have written to Macaulay, Minister Macaulay, and Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, to try to have meetings with them and to bring this up to their attention, because this person who told me that has direct access to my file and decision of everything making. So I have tried to counter circuit and go directly up to them, and unfortunately they just told me how sorry they were and that they were they believed in their ministry to be able to handle things properly. It's been 5 years waiting. Still nothing has been done. And this has been going on with the Veterans Affairs for over 15 years. I have waited and asked and waited 18 years for a second set of wheels for my wheelchairs. Everybody has winter tires in Quebec. It's mandatory, it's law. But yet they won't give a second set of wheels for wheelchairs. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, any country that encourages disabled veterans to kill themselves should be ashamed. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. Christine Gauthier, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Tucker.
So Adam Kinzinger was a congressman the other day. Now he's not. He's already found a new job. Where's Adam Kinzinger working? What workplace will get to watch him cry? Well, we predicted it. And we were right, not to brag. We'll tell you after the break. Sort of amazing news to report tonight. Not really a Fox News alert, but very close. Adam Kinzinger leaves Congress, and then someone hires him. Someone literally hired Adam Kinzinger for a job. You may not believe it, but Trace Gallagher of Fox News can confirm it. He was watching another channel tonight when he learned. Trace Gallagher, what did you see?
Well, after seeing its ratings plummet over the past 2 years, Tucker, CNN has informed the world that it will no longer be a far-left media organization and will instead go back to being an unbiased news source, as if there was evidence that CNN was ever an unbiased news source. But to prove that things are changing, CNN has now hired former GOP Congressman Adam Kinzinger as not just a political analyst, mind you, but the network's senior political analyst, which is no surprise to this show, which just days ago predicted this. Watch.
In just weeks, Adam Kinzinger will be another CNN contributor. No one will ever see him again. But we will never forget him.
Bingo. And it appears to be a good fit, considering the only one who hates former President Trump more than CNN is Adam Kinzinger. Remember, it was Kinzinger who voted to impeach Trump. Kinzinger, who was a member of the January 6th committee, said if Trump was not charged with inciting an insurrection, the future of the country is doomed. And Kinzinger, who called Trump's GOP, quote, kind of creepy. Got to be looking forward to the promos, right? Kinzinger and CNN, the dynamic, unbiased duo.
Providing some senior political analysis. Trace Gallagher, the best. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.